The story of Ustia, the nation of magic, began with humanity's sudden pursuit of extraordinary magic. There was no conscious thought of wanting to use magic, but after countless generations of tremendous effort, humans ultimately brought true magic into existence. The creators, driven by a desire to preserve their legacy, sought to pass this power down to future generations. To achieve this, they chose to bind magic to their bloodlines, safeguarding their life's work through a biological inheritance. As a result, magical abilities began to emerge and flourish. In Ustia, the nobility held a high status and enjoyed significant privileges, and in return, they were responsible for using their magic to shield their people from both foreign invaders and hostile monsters. From among the nation's magical nobles, the famed house of Marcus Friendbride stood as a well-known family, with the boy Hermes next in line to inherit their title. From the moment Hermes was born, his father, Lord Friendbride, sensed an immense magical energy coursing through him and was convinced the child was a true prodigy. Generations ago, the Friendbride lineage had held the rank of duke, but a history of magically weak heirs had caused their land holdings to diminish and their status to be reduced to that of a Marcus. The family seemed doomed to continue their fall from grace, but with Hermes' birth, his father became certain the boy was a divine gift sent to save their family from their misfortune. In a stern, unwavering voice, he gravely instructed his servants to raise Hermes with the utmost care, threatening to behead anyone who dared to mistreat him. 4 years later, following a magic lesson, Hermes bounded into his father's presence, his face beaming with pride as he eagerly shared that his teacher had commended him for his exceptional potential to surpass all of his peers. Friendbride's praise was immediate and heartfelt as he declared that Hermes would one day become the greatest mage their family had ever known. His father asserted that he truly looked forward to witnessing the full extent of Hermes' lineage magic, imagining he might possess a power as great as their ancestors or perhaps even the legendary kings of old. The servants were quick to shower Hermes with their own praise, but his older brother, Chris, stood silently by a large pillar, feeling overshadowed by Hermes' radiant presence. Friendbride glanced at Chris with a look of visible disappointment, remarking that his abilities were utterly pathetic when compared to his younger brother. At Friendbride's harsh suggestion that Chris should learn a thing or two from Hermes, Chris's face twisted with a mix of shock and mortification, and he quickly fled the room. Not long after, Hermes was studying alongside his close friend, Katja von Trachea, the heiress to the prestigious von Trachea Duchy, whom he affectionately referred to as Kati. They were discussing lineage magic, a unique power passed down through noble bloodlines. Kati mentioned that she was constantly hearing about this specific magic from her tutor and how it was far more potent and distinct than the magic used by common people. However, her enthusiasm faded into disappointment as she told him she wished to play, but he was simply too absorbed in his rambling about magic. Brushing aside her comments, Hermes persisted in discussing magic, asking her what kind of mage she aspired to be and sharing his own dreams of becoming like the heroes and legends. He described a future where he was a strong and valiant mage, consistently battling evil forces and protecting innocent people. Upon hearing this, Kati assured him that he seemed to truly love magic and that she believed he could achieve his dreams. However, as time passed and Hermes turned 7, a significant crisis struck their family when a pastor delivered the devastating news that he could not sense any lineage magic from Hermes. The pastor explained that lineage magic should naturally manifest by his age, yet there was absolutely nothing to be found, and this only indicated that Hermes possessed no magical ability and zero aptitude whatsoever. As the kingdom's renowned appraiser, he assured them that his findings were true. Friendbride was utterly stunned by the news, unable to believe that the family's supposed greatest heir had no magical aptitude. The pastor further explained that while the extent of magic inherited could vary based on the thickness of one's blood, he believed it was ultimately a matter of fate, with no connection to greatness. He remarked that it truly was a shame that young Lord Hermes appeared to be unfavored by the gods. Friendbride stumbled, unable to comprehend the pastor's words. His voice crumbled as he realized his grand ambitions and plans to use Hermes to regain their title had vanished, and all his efforts had been for nothing. As Hermes tried to help him, he was met with a harsh new side of his father, who roughly pushed him away and declared in icy tone that Hermes was absolutely worthless. Later on, Friendbride violently tossed him behind the cages, denouncing him as a worthless, disappointing scum who deserved to be cast out to the streets. With a look of disgust, he remarked that just knowing they lived in the same house and breathed the same air made him want to vomit, yet Hermes tried to convince his father, promising he would work even harder and double his magic lessons. He vowed to do anything to become the mage Friendbride had hoped for, Yet Friendbreed's voice flared as he demanded he shut his mouth, further labeling him a defective product. Friendbreed questioned how Herms could ever hope to use magic without a single shred of lineage power. He reminded Herms that this was a great gift from the star god, one that had clearly been denied to him, leading Friendbreed to declare that the star god had abandoned him. With venomous words, Friendbreed denounced Herms as a demon spawn rather than a divine gift, leaving the boy completely shattered. As he prepared to leave, Friendbreed coldly proposed a deal that he would release Herms from captivity only if he could miraculously wield lineage magic. And so on, days turned into a cruel reality for Herms as he came to understand that without lineage magic, he would be trapped in the cell forever. Just then, his older brother, Chris, appeared, informing him that their father had told him everything and tasked him with providing personal magic lessons to him. With a menacing grin, Chris raised his arm, showcasing his divine magic and proclaiming it to be the power of one chosen by the gods. He then unleashed a burst of magical energy and struck Herms with enough force to send him crashing against the walls, suggesting that the shock might help awaken his lineage power. Chris's voice turned frigid as he stated that Herms' current situation was a result of his arrogant attitude and his refusal to acknowledge him. Hearing this, Herms reflected that Chris might be right, as he knew that Friendbreed had always ignored Chris and favored him above everyone else. However, his true desire was simply to master magic, but he had been so overwhelmed by the praise that he never once stopped to consider how Chris might have felt being overshadowed. As he began to leave, Chris declared with malice that he would be the one to conquer the title of the family's head and become the great mage Herms had always dreamed of being. A while later, Caddy approached Herms and gently held his hand, asking if he had suffered at the hands of his father and brother. With a concerned expression, she apologized to him, explaining that she wished she could heal him but did not yet possess that kind of magic to do so. She insisted their actions were horrible, no matter how much they needed magic to restore the family's reputation. Herms humbly accepted that he was defective and stated that being able to eat was more than enough for him. Yet Caddy firmly squeezed his face and whispered words of encouragement, telling him that she had unwavering faith in him. She insisted that because he had always aspired to be a great mage, it was impossible for him not to have lineage magic, as his love and admiration for magic ran deeper than anyone else's. She promised him with unwavering determination that he would one day become a great mage and stand proudly alongside her. Herms was deeply touched by Caddy's words and thanked her for her kindness, informing that his father had promised to set him free if he could demonstrate lineage magic. Upon hearing this, she spoke with a faint blush and expressed her distaste for seeing people she cared about being confined, but her words were cut short by the sound of rustling from outside. She quickly began to depart before reassuring him that she had absolute faith he would find a way out of that place. And so Herms endured his mistreatment in that horrible place, but Caddy's cheerful words and his desire for freedom were the two things that boosted his spirit. Strengthened by this new resolve, he worked tirelessly to find his magic within the confines of his cell. However, 3 years had passed with Herms' circumstances remaining unchanged, and the sole hope that had sustained him was shattered when Caddy announced she would no longer be visiting him, leaving him utterly hopeless. With a sorrowful expression, she delivered the devastating news of her betrothal to the second prince, a man named Asura. She explained that he was the most powerful user of bloodline magic alive and the leading contender for the throne, a proposal that she had no reason or right to refuse as the heiress of a dukedom. However, she revealed that she would somehow manage to secure a temporary delay of half a year, clinging to the faint hope that this might be enough time for Herms to somehow be set free. But her words were cut short by the arrival of Chris, who declared that such hopes were impossible. He informed them that with the promise of marriage, the entire Friendbreed family had been taken under Prince Asura, and that he himself now had the honor of serving as the prince's right-hand man. He began to praise Asura's discerning eye for talent, but his arrogant remark was cut off by Caddy's fierce demand to know what would become of Herms. Chris disclosed that since the Friendbreed family now served the prince, Herms' fate was sealed as Asura had already ordered his elimination, deeming him worthless due to his lack of magical aptitude. Chris's voice was laced with a cruel amusement as he ordered the guards to accompany Herms away, simultaneously moving to block Caddy's path as she desperately vowed to negotiate with the prince herself. Later, abandoned in an impoverished village, Herms found himself the subject of suspicious gazes from all sides, and he couldn't help but ponder how he could possibly earn his father's trust back. His thoughts were interrupted by the appearance of several thugs, and their predatory expressions confirmed his instinct of immediate danger. Herms sprang into a desperate run, but his movements felt sluggish and weak, as the men easily overtook him and threw him aggressively to the dusty ground. Looming menacingly over Hermes, they debated his fate, one suggesting ransom while another scoffed that a weakling noble would neither sell well as a slave nor fetch any price. Therefore, they quickly came to a grim conclusion and decided to kill him. As the brutal assault began, one of the thugs declared that they were the scum of society, driven by a burning hatred for the noble class. As the blows rained down, Hermes wondered if this was truly all his life amounted to, and that all the hard work to be recognized by his father in society had led only to an impending, meaningless hell. Suddenly, a brilliant flash of lightning struck the man holding the knife, leaving everyone completely stunned. Just then, a beautiful woman emerged from the shadows, and as she slowly approached the thugs, she stated that she had been in a perfectly pleasant mood upon returning home, only to have it spoiled by such a disturbing scene. She then fixed them with a look of utter disgust, expressing her contempt for men who would inflict such cruelty upon a mere child. Her threat of a beating was met with hostile demands from the thugs, who questioned what gave her the audacity to oppose them. In response, she skillfully conjured various magic circles around those men, which promptly exploded with blasts of energy and sent them crashing to the ground. Hermes could only watch, his eyes wide with astonishment at her remarkable display of power. She seemed to possess mastery over a wide range of magical elements, combining them with a fluid and deadly precision that completely overwhelmed her opponents. The sight baffled Hermes, as he had always believed that a person should only be capable of wielding a single form of bloodline magic, yet what this woman showcased was far too powerful and flexible. Just then, recognizing her distinct appearance and that incredible magic power, the thugs wondered aloud whether she was the walking catastrophe and the renowned sky witch known as Rose. A smirk touched her lips as she remarked that it had taken them a ridiculously long time to figure it out. She admitted they had thoroughly enraged her, expressing her annoyance that thugs like them always assumed any user of general magic was some wannabe lackey of the former lord. As she spoke, she began to trace an enormous, shimmering magic circle in the air, her incantation echoing with power before she unleashed the full fury of her bloodline magic, a devastating force that obliterated the men in the blink of an eye. Turning to Hermes, she informed him that she had not killed them, as she had no desire to soil her hands with their blood. Yet as she began to depart, Hermes immediately sensed another threat, and warned her of a magical sniper hidden nearby. Rose reacted instantly, and conjured a spell that destroyed the hidden attacker with ease, though she admitted she hadn't expected mere thugs to be so well prepared. Her eyes then turned to Hermes, sparkling with a newfound excitement as she confided that she also hadn't anticipated him to be so skilled at detecting magic. Her curiosity piqued as she pressed him with questions about the kind of perception power he possessed, noting she had never met someone with more talent than her own. She then formally introduced herself and inquired after his name. Hermes gave his own in return, though he could not have anticipated that this single, chance encounter would be the one to turn his life around, and this was his first meeting with the key to his revival, the woman known as the Witch Rose. Moments later, as Rose treated Hermes with healing magic, he promptly expressed his gratitude for her help. However, she remarked that she found it strange he could so accurately notice the sniper with his detection power, and she questioned if he was actually a strong magic wielder, further voicing her skepticism that common thugs couldn't have beaten someone so capable. At her words, memories of the trauma he had suffered at the hands of his family came rushing back, and Hermes's composure finally broke. His eyes welled with tears as he attempted to explain, a sight that seemed to genuinely shock Rose, who immediately asked if he was experiencing pain anywhere else. With a quivering voice, he struggled to explain that he had always aspired to become a legendary mage like her, but had proven powerless to do anything, exclaiming that no matter how much he trained, the output was always useless in the end. Sensing his deep-seated pain, Rose gently suggested that he might find relief in sharing his experiences and revealing the truth of his past. Not long after, as the sun began to set, Rose finally learned the full story of his family's abandonment and the loss of his only friend. She gently embraced Hermes, remarking on the arrogance of nobles who acted so high and mighty while merely borrowing the power of their ancestors. She firmly advised him to pay them no mind, but then a specific detail from his story suddenly clicked into place, and her full attention sharpened on a new realization. Hermes had explicitly mentioned he possessed no lineage magic at all. To his surprise, Rose immediately picked him up with a surge of enthusiasm, exclaiming that his manipulation of fundamental and sensing magic was nothing short of remarkable. The fact that he possessed no bloodline magic meant he was not weak, but was instead a hidden gem waiting to be polished. She seemed absolutely determined to prevent him from slipping into darkness, promising to take him home with her right then and there. However, recognizing she had gotten carried away, she carefully set him down and apologized for letting her emotions get the better of her. Then, with an unwavering tone, she asked if he truly liked magic. He responded without a moment's hesitation that he loved it, but added that his lack of lineage magic was the very thing that prevented him from becoming the mage he dreamed of being. In response, she gently held him and offered to clear up his misunderstanding, stating that while bloodline magic was indeed powerful, having it or not was beyond human control, regardless of one's efforts. With a gentle yet secure grasp, she lifted him up once more and soared through the town as a refreshing breeze rushed past them. She told him not to be mistaken about the idea of blessings from God, nor to be satisfied like the half-baked idiots who celebrated the gifts they were simply born with. She elaborated that magic was not something one received, but was rather a force created by the logic and reasoning of humans, and if a person earnestly worked for it, they could create any kind of magic they desired. While bloodline magic was a remarkable gift, she introduced him to a new perspective that being bound to a single type of magic for one's entire life was also a curse in its own way. Hermes had no bloodline magic, which did not mean he was not chosen, but rather that a god had not chosen to curse him with limitation. He was a mage with the innate ability to create any and all kinds of magic, with the potential to craft wonders even more beautiful and remarkable than her own. She declared him the most liberated mage in the world, and revealing that she had been seeking someone exactly like him, she formally invited Hermes to become her disciple. It was a suspiciously convenient offer, one that Hermes might have questioned if he were thinking rationally. Yet Rose spoke of magic with such a vivid, breathtaking energy that he began to believe it ignited the same fiery passion within her as it did in him. For Hermes, this shared passion was all the convincing he needed, and he readily agreed to their partnership. The days stretched into weeks, the weeks into months, and the months into years, and 5 years later, Caddy was seen sprinted through the streets with a look of pure desperation engraved onto her features. From the moment Hermes had drifted away from her side, Caddy had poured her entire being into fulfilling her noble duties. She practiced and studied diligently, a tireless effort to silence the pangs of guilt in her chest. However, it was all for nothing since Astor had deemed her, and every suggestion she made for the good of the country, as utterly worthless. He had dismissed her proposals and recommendations as ridiculous, refusing to entertain any of her advice. His reasoning was simple. He believed everything in the nation was dictated by bloodline magic, and as the one blessed by the gods with the strongest lineage, Astor considered himself the law. He had cruelly asserted that if Caddy found his decisions so detestable, she had only her own inferior magic to blame. Now in the present she was cornered as Chris and his guards surrounded her, accusing her of conspiring against the state. But Caddy protested, insisting they had no evidence and demanding to know on what grounds she was even suspected. She reminded Chris he was overstepping his authority by attempting to arrest the Duke's daughter without a formal charge, warning him that she would ensure he faced dire consequences. Chris merely scoffed at her threats, remarking how her words sounded just like those of a true villain. He openly admitted to having no official charges, but revealed that his orders came directly from Astor himself, and he would carry out Astor's every order without question. Caddy knew instantly it was a bluff. If she were to be formally arrested at that moment, she would have willingly turned herself in for questioning. However, it would be the same as admitting guilt, and the official charges would inevitably follow. Though she knew he was deceiving her, the mere bluff was enough to start a rumor, and that was precisely how the world of nobility operated. With a fierce determination ignited in her eyes, Caddy refused to yield and conjured a magic circle. Seeing her resistance, Chris sneered that all criminals attempt to escape, even if her status as one was not yet established. He then threatened to call upon his father to have the Ministry of Justice deal with her. Enraged by his audacity, she declared that his own disrespect was one thing, but to invoke his father's well-known crudeness was another matter entirely. Without another word, she activated her bloodline magic and unleashed a torrent of energy toward Chris, but he was not one to be so easily caught off guard. With a swift wave of his hand, he countered her magic with his own, and a violent turbulence of opposing forces clashed between them, which sent powerful shockwaves through the town. As their magical forces clashed with a resounding impact, Katie realized that the gap between their abilities ran far deeper than she had ever imagined. Though she was aware her magic hadn't perfected yet, she hadn't anticipated the vast disparity that now stood before her. Her energy quickly drained, and Chris' spell struck her with a forceful blow, sending her stumbling to the ground. As he prepared to strike again, he flashed a sinister grin and remarked that Astor had given him permission to inflict harm on her. Just then, a flood of childhood memories with her cherished friend surged into her mind, and she reflected that Hermes had been the only one to praise her magic with genuine admiration. While everyone else had criticized her abilities, Hermes had remained faithful by her side, and his encouraging words had lifted her spirit countless times. Yet she felt powerless to save him, and she berated herself as selfish for being so emotionally shattered by it, especially since her own worthlessness had failed him. She pondered that no amount of regret could change the past, but if she could indulge in one more selfish wish, she desperately longed for Hermes to rescue her. To her utter amazement, just as Chris' attack was about to land, a mysterious boy materialized out of nowhere and cast a brilliant shield that successfully deflected the blow. The boy admitted that he wasn't entirely sure of the situation but could see she was in distress, which compelled him to intervene. As he faced her and commented on the passage of time, Caddy's eyes widened in astonishment, recognizing him as none other than Hermes himself, who declared with a warm smile that he had kept his promise and returned to her as a remarkable mage. Both Caddy and Chris stood startled by his sudden arrival, and there was a reason behind his return to the place from which he had been banished. To shed light on this, he felt compelled to start from the beginning, tracing his journey back to the day he first encountered his mentor, Rose. On that fateful day, Hermes had been plagued by nightmares of his traumatic past, and when he awoke with a jolt, he found himself in an utterly unfamiliar setting, with Rose sleeping peacefully beside him. Despite her warm and gentle greeting, he remained flustered by the awkward circumstances and hesitated to respond with full openness. Noticing his bewildered expression, she observed that he seemed to have no memory of recent events and gently informed him that they were currently in her home. She explained that she had brought him there the previous night, and since he had fallen asleep on the way, she couldn't bring herself to wake him up. She added that she had tended to him, wiping his body and dressing him in comfortable clothes, prompting Hermes to apologize profusely and express his heartfelt gratitude. However, with a delighted smile, she confessed that she ought to be the one thanking him, revealing that his presence had allowed her to sleep deeply for the first time in a while. She shared that living alone had sometimes left her yearning for a human's warmth beside her, but she playfully noted that children like him truly had a high body temperature, making him the perfect body pillow as she had imagined. When Rose teasingly asked if he'd like to sleep alongside her a bit longer, he declined with a hint of embarrassment, insisting he was perfectly fine. She then suggested giving him a tour of the house before they enjoyed a leisurely breakfast, and the moment she extended her hand, Hermes eagerly grasped it. Rose led him around the house, familiarizing him with the layout and mentioning that, aside from her laboratory, there weren't many places he could explore, though she cautioned him against venturing out recklessly until he adjusted to his surroundings. Yet, as Hermes appeared completely overwhelmed by it all, Rose gently inquired if something was wrong. Unaware of the depth of his disorientation, she didn't realize he perceived this as a gentle dream, a far cry from the reality he had experienced before, leading him to wonder if someone like him deserved such abundant kindness. Just then, Rose pointed out that since he would be residing there from that day onward, lacking his own room would be highly impractical and inconvenient for him. To lift his spirits, she decided to offer him a spare room, granting him the freedom to use it as he pleased, and assured him that she had plenty of options to choose from as she lives alone. However, upon entering the room, they were both shocked to find it in a state of utter disarray, resembling more of a cluttered storage space than a spare bedroom. Rose herself seemed taken aback by the room's neglected condition, admitting that it hadn't seen a thorough cleaning in a decade. Hermes felt a pang of despair, muttering to himself that it was only fitting for someone like him to end up with such a space, and that he should be grateful for whatever space he got, even if it was a storage room. Hearing his disheartened words, Rose quickly apologized for the oversight and suggested they have breakfast instead. However, the breakfast attempt turned into a complete disaster as well, with the food emerging from the kitchen in a burnt and smoldering mess. Hermes' face reflected a blend of disappointment and distress, and his voice was barely audible as he murmured that he could eat just about anything as long as it was properly cooked. Overwhelmed by her own incompetence, Rose clutched her head in frustration, feeling like a total failure as she recalled that she hadn't cooked in the last 10 years, typically relying on preserved food instead. In a low, grumbling tone, she admitted she had hoped to show this heartbroken boy that she could be a dependable adult he could trust and rely on, but everything seemed to be falling apart. Meanwhile, Hermes hadn't meant to be rude, yet he couldn't ignore the fact that she was a disaster when it came to her household skills. Still, he graciously agreed to eat everything she had prepared, though he gently requested a piece of bread afterward. His primary aim was to gain magical knowledge from her, and when he politely asked for her guidance, her face lit up with eager enthusiasm. As she led him to the expansive library within her home, he was utterly awestruck by the vast array of magic books lining the shelves. To his surprise, Rose suddenly apologized out of the blue, asking if he still harbored caution toward her. She disclosed that she wanted to get rid of his cautiousness, confessing that she had gone out of her way to care for him, doing thoughtful things like cooking meals and tending to his needs, though she had failed miserably at every turn. She acknowledged that it was indeed suspicious for a stranger like her to take him into an unfamiliar place, and that he had every right to doubt her intentions. Far from blaming him, she expressed relief that he was a cautious child who thought things through carefully. Kneeling down to meet his gaze, her voice trembled with emotion as she softly told him he was a true miracle in her life. She gently assured him that she would never betray him as long as his passion for magic remained genuine, and even if he struggled, she vowed to never turn her back or give up on him. At that moment, Hermes realized he had indeed feared Rose abandoning him. When it was discovered that he lacked lineage magic, his entire world had been turned upside down, leaving him at the mercy of cruel hands. Therefore, there was a part of him who couldn't shake off the anxiety that Rose, too, would eventually abandon him for some reason. Hearing her heartfelt words, Hermes apologized sincerely, remarking that he would have perished if she hadn't stopped to help him, and thanked her for restoring his faith in magic once more. He offered a heartfelt apology for his initial distrust, then flashed a cheerful grin as he asked her to take good care of him, affectionately calling her master. Taken aback by his words, she enveloped him in a tight, warm hug, proudly acknowledging him as her great disciple. A while later, as Hermes drifted into exhausted slumber on the couch, Rose gently draped a blanket around him, her expression shifting to one of quiet seriousness as she revealed that she harbored an ultimate objective for his magical training. Though the results would take a considerable amount of time to manifest, she remained devoted to her commitment, convinced that Hermes was the only one capable of fully mastering that magic, the exceptional masterpiece and the strongest spell she had ever crafted. Before Hermes realized it, the days of training alongside his master slipped by in the blink of an eye, and the moment arrived when he felt fully prepared to return to the royal capital. When Rose voiced her doubts, he explained that his determination to go stemmed from a heartfelt desire to honor his master's teachings, reclaim what he had once lost, and discover his own magical potential. He asserted that this drive necessitated exploring the diverse magic of the royal capital, prompting Rose to fall silent for a brief moment before bursting into tears. She enveloped him in a firm embrace and pleaded with him to reconsider, her voice trembling as she exclaimed that she couldn't bear the separation and couldn't imagine living without him. Watching her throw a tantrum, Hermes thought to himself that Rose struggled with even the simplest household tasks without him. Still, he gently pointed out that it would be increasingly difficult to leave if she kept holding him back with all her might, while she grumbled that she'd lose her excuse to cuddle him like a giant stuffed animal. Feeling a flush of embarrassment, he begged her to stop, reminding her that he was already 15 years old, and she acknowledged with a shift in demeanor that this was her disciple's departure after all. Her expression turned serious as she reminded Hermes that the lessons she had imparted over the past 5 years were merely a seed. The choice of magic he would master and the kind of magical flower he would bloom into rested solely with him. She warned that the royal capital was a harsh place, where people carelessly accepted what they were born with, never bothering to think for themselves. She bluntly labeled it a gathering spot for lazy and wicked individuals, and was certain that Hermes would encounter sights he'd rather avoid. She asked once more if he was sure about leaving, and he replied with unwavering resolve, stating he had a specific goal to pursue in the royal capital. He added that he couldn't remain there indefinitely if he aimed to rise to greater heights and stand alongside Rose. She embraced him again, vowing not to forgive him unless he achieved something truly remarkable, playfully threatening that she'd never let him hear the end of it. Meanwhile, Hermes stated that even though it was a lie, he wished she'd send him off without such unnecessary remarks. Before his departure, she ordered him in a firm tone to make a bold statement in the royal capital, to unleash his full potential, and prove his remarkable strength to those who had once dismissed him as incompetent. As he set out, she confessed with deep affection that she cherished him as her disciple and yearned for him to attain everything he had ever dreamed of. Now the scene shifted back to the present, where Hermes stood face to face with Caddy, his mind racing with the thought that he could finally repay her kindness and save her this time with the magical abilities he had diligently developed. Upon seeing her rescuer, Caddy could only question if he was truly the same Hermes she once knew, to which she calmly noted that while it had been a long time, he felt compelled to step in as she appeared to be in a difficult spot. Chris voiced his disbelief, wondering aloud if it was truly Hermes, and upon confirming his identity, Hermes asked in return if he should still address Chris as older brother. The suggestion was instantly refused, as Chris cruelly reminded him that he had been expelled from the Friendbright family 5 years ago and was no longer considered his brother. With an expression of pure distaste, Chris added that he couldn't believe Hermes was even still alive, but his attention immediately shifted to a more pressing matter, and he commanded Hermes to hand over Kadi without resistance. When Hermes inquired why they were treating her so aggressively, Chris's patience finally snapped, and he exclaimed that Hermes was now nothing but a commoner who should stay out of business that did not concern him. He suggested Hermes stop playing the hero and silently hand over the criminal, a word that caused Hermes to pause in surprise. Kadi immediately clarified that the accusation was baseless, protesting that she had stolen nothing and done nothing to tarnish the Duke's honor. Chris again reminded Hermes of his commoner status, while Kadi insisting it was unnecessary for him to involve himself in such an unsightly dispute. But Hermes turned to Kadi and expressed his heartfelt gratitude, acknowledging how much her help had meant to him in the past. He poured out his emotions, explaining that if she had not been there to cheer him on while he was locked away, his spirit would have been broken long ago, and he declared that he had now returned specifically to repay the kindness she had shown him. Without a moment's hesitation, he hinted that he could offer her numerous favors, even recommending to deal with the noble Chris by eliminating him. However, she thought to herself that he was being utterly unreasonable, and that by showing up at this moment and making such a suggestion would only serve to make her more dependent on him. On the other hand, enraged by Hermes' audacious remark, Chris instantly began to conjure his magic, stating that Hermes had grown ridiculously arrogant while all he did earlier was defend himself against one of his spells. As Chris began chanting his bloodline magic, unleashing a familiar barrage of magical bullets, Hermes watched with an air of nostalgia, commenting that it was a familiar sight as he had witnessed Chris demonstrate this very magic countless times in the past. A sly smirk touched Hermes' lips as he admitted that it was a true pleasure for Chris's magic to be the first display of prowess he encountered upon his return to the capital. As Hermes activated his own magic, he declared his intention to showcase one of his new spells, and as his incantation began, Kadi was amazed by the fluency of his chanting. A brilliant aura of light wrapped around him, and he reflected internally on how this power was not a lineage magic, nor a curse from the gods, but the pure embodiment of his master's teachings and his own relentless hard work. With a final word, he produced his miraculous creation magic, the Steel of the Origin, leaving Kadi completely amazed. However, Chris grew visibly agitated, claiming it was likely a lowly third-class spell at best, and that it was impossible for Hermes to possess anything more powerful. For a fleeting moment, his composure slipped, and a flicker of memory of their childhood surfaced where Hermes had everything except magic. But he quickly suppressed the thought to refocus on the important task at hand. Without further hesitation, Chris hurled his magical projectiles forward, fiercely exclaiming that no one would care if an unlucky commoner like Hermes got swept up and killed in the commotion. As the projectiles sped towards them, Hermes held his ground and maintained his magical efforts, his mind racing through Rose's lessons, who had taught him that the foundation of his magic, the Steel of the Origin, was to analyze and recreate. She had informed him that all magic adhered to a certain logic, a set of laws where a consistent cause and effect could be subjected to duplicability. If one could perfectly understand the foundation of a spell, they could theoretically recreate any magic. Rose had revealed that she herself was limited by her own lineage curse, but she had asserted that Hermes was different. Unaffected by such a curse, he could analyze any magic, apply his accumulated knowledge, and unlock its fundamental principles. In a shocking turn of events that put this very theory to the test, Hermes began chanting a spell that sounded eerily familiar to both Chris and Kadi. To their utter bewilderment, he completed the incantation and cleverly unleashed Chris's own magic, launching the barrage of magical bullets back in his direction. Though Chris was completely stunned, he managed to produce a magical shield to block the attack, his mind reeling with disorientation at how Hermes could possibly utilize his own lineage magic. Hermes himself was amazed, knowing that while the Steel of the Origin could theoretically recreate any spell, executing the theory was an entirely different matter. It required multiple skills such as an incredible level of observational skill and a solid foundation in magic theory, making a complex lineage magic seemingly impossible to copy on sight. Yet his success in this actual battle was owed to a single unique advantage. The countless times he had been forced to witness Chris's lineage magic during his childhood had burned its every detail into his memory, allowing him to finally achieve the impossible. Chris's anger erupted in a torrent of words, declaring that he was different from him and proclaiming himself as the chosen one, and that it was unthinkable for him to lose to someone as insignificant as him. His voice was laced with malice as he exclaimed that Herm's only choice was to die somewhere without making his presence known or spend the rest of his life living beneath him. However, this momentary slip of defense was all the opportunity Hermes needed, and he rapidly unleashed a flurry of magical bullets that struck Chris with tremendous force, sending him flying across the field. As the accompanying guards rushed to their master's side, Hermes urged Kadi to flee with him immediately, while Chris's furious command for the guards to catch them and kill the one he called a defective idiot. Once they had escaped and found a moment to collect themselves, Hermes found his attention drawn to Kadi. He realized he hadn't been able to truly look at her during the commotion, and now, in the quiet aftermath, he found her beauty captivating. It was then that Kadi's composure finally crumbled, and her pent-up emotions overflowed as she scolded him for hiding for 5 long years. She disclosed how desperately she had tried to track him down, only to find not a single trace of him, no matter how hard she searched. In a gentle, pained tone, she questioned why he hadn't relied on her, asserting that he could have sought help from the Trochia Ducatum, and that there were so many ways they could have assisted him. Her eyes brimming with tears and her voice trembled as she revealed her deepest fear, that she had believed him to be dead, a thought that had filled her with unbearable dread and remorse. Hermes could only apologize, and she in turn offered her forgiveness now that he had finally appeared before her, alive and well. As he gently embraced her, she also apologized for being unable to help when he needed her most in the past. After their tearful reunion, she began asking a flurry of questions, eager to know where he had been for the past 5 years, what he had been up to, and how he had been supporting himself. To her surprise, Hermes revealed that he hadn't yet decided on his house and job in the royal capital, and Kadi further questioned if he had any solid idea in his mind. When he admitted that he had some ideas in his mind, but hadn't made any concrete decision yet, Kadi swiftly offered him to move in with her and promised to provide him with employment as well, a proposal that left Hermes truly surprised. The scene then transitioned to Astor's mansion, where Chris was pleading for forgiveness, only to be bluntly cut off by the prince's fierce tone. Astor's expression was twisted in fury as he reminded Chris that he had been ordered to capture Kadi and had been provided with sufficient forces, yet had failed because of a single magician whose existence was still unknown. Chris gritted his teeth in frustration, privately resolving to lie in his report rather than admit he had lost to his younger brother who had been exiled from the nation. Meanwhile, Astor began to reflect aloud, stating that perhaps the gods were presenting him with a trial to assess his capacity for mercy and forgiveness, which were the essential qualities for a king. However, he concluded that Kadi's continued existence was harming the country, and she had been consistently hindering his path, which was why her movements needed to be restricted. Astor's next words left Chris stunned, as the prince announced they would be investigating the mage who had interfered with their work. But noticing Chris's bewildered expression, Astor inquired if there was a problem with this decision. But Chris hastily assured him that he would initiate the investigation right away. With a final hint of superiority, Astor remarked that Aesors who did not know their place ought to be subjugated, just as they had been in every previous instance. After leaving his master's sanctuary and returning to the royal capital, Hermes had stumbled upon his childhood friend Kadi, who was being detained on false charges. He had succeeded in activating a lineage magic using his Steel of the Origin, and somehow managed to rescue her from her predicament. Despite being taken by surprise by her subsequent proposal, he had decided to accompany her, and so they finally arrived at her family residence, the house of Trochia's estate. Though he had been there numerous times as a child, the sheer scale of the estate never ceased to amaze him. As they arrived at the mansion, a servant named Layla hurried towards them and asked about her well-being, expressing her deep concern on her late arrival, but her initial greeting of relief quickly turning to concern as she took in Kadi's ragged clothes and numerous injuries. When she hastily questioned about it, Kadi gently assured the worried servant that there was nothing to worry about. Just then, Layla's questioning gaze fell upon Hermes and she inquired for his identity, prompting Kadi to introduce him, mentioning that she might recall him from their childhood. A flicker of recognition crossed Layla's face as her mind clicked into place, recalling the boy and the rumors of his expulsion for having no magical aptitude. Still, she expressed her deep relief at seeing him again and her gratitude that he was safe. Kadi reassured him that he was safe among her people, who were nothing like the house of Frenbraid. With a warm smile, she extended a formal welcome, and Layla immediately accompanied him to meet Lord Jurgen, Kadi's father and the master of the house. The Duke greeted him warmly, acknowledging that Kadi had already briefed him on the situation and extending his sincere thanks for rescuing his daughter from the predicament. Jurgen then shared that Caddy had been so thoroughly impressed with the promising magical skills Herms had displayed that she was willing to hire him as her personal guard. However, he stated that before any final decision could be made, he would need to witness this magic for himself. As Herms complied, he conjured his magic with a swift motion of his hand, summoning a luminous book that hovered above his palm, and he declared that this ability was known as the Steel of the Origin. Jurgen found the display quite magnificent, confessing that he had never seen or even heard of such a kind of magic before. He immediately inquired about its origin and from whom Herms had acquired it, to which Herms could only respond that a particular person had bestowed the power upon him, a person whose identity he absolutely could not reveal. Before leaving Rose's side, she had extracted a promise from him to keep her existence a secret, and never to speak of her or disclose her identity. Upon hearing that, Jurgen's demeanor turned serious as he declared he was now asking not as a grateful father, but as the head of the House of Trachea, and questioned if Herms would still refuse to reveal any information. Despite understanding the consequences of opposing a duke, Herms remained committed to his promise. Jurgen then pressed further, inquiring if the individual in question held a higher standing than his own, which prevented him from speaking. But Herms simply responded that it was not a matter of coercion, but rather that he refused to be a disciple who would break a sacred promise to his master, the person he respected most in the world. A look of clear approval passed over Jurgen's face at the boy's unwavering loyalty, and deciding to leave the matter aside for the time being, he shifted the topic to the details of the magic itself. He brought up the fact that Herms had been able to utilize Chris's lineage magic, and inquired if the purpose of his ability was therefore to replicate other lineage-based powers. In response, Herms clarified that it was not a copy, to be precise, but rather a recreation. His magic allowed him to reproduce any spell he had seen or felt before. Jurgen pressed Herms on any constraints on what he could recreate, such as single-use restrictions or a limit on the number of people who could access it. Herms simply revealed there were no such restrictions, clarifying he could utilize any spell again at any time once it was recreated, and that his ability to use previously learned spells would remain unaffected, even after acquiring new ones. Astonished by the magic's capabilities, Caddy's eyes widened as she inquired if such claims were genuinely possible, and Herms affirmed it without any hesitation. Jurgen pointed out this would undoubtedly turn the noble society upside down, then further questioned whether his capacity to learn new spells would increase the more he recreated one. Herms said that while it was indeed possible theoretically, recreating magic took a tremendous amount of time. Jurgen then posed one last question: what was his ultimate objective? He wondered aloud why, despite his current strength, Herms had returned to the royal capital, asserting that he couldn't let him stay unless he revealed his true goal. The reason for saving Caddy also remained a mystery to him, as it appeared Herms had intervened without knowing the full details of the situation. Jurgen suggested that Herms might be attempting to gain favor with the House of Trachea by opposing his brother, with the ultimate goal of being reinstated into the House of Frenbright as a reward. These suspicions alone provided Jurgen with enough reason to drive Herms from the house. Herms found himself contemplating Jurgen's suspicions, acknowledging they were only natural given that he was the duke, the head of the household, and most importantly, Caddy's father. Given the circumstances, Herms decided to be entirely frank with his feelings without hiding anything. With this thought, he revealed that his primary objective was to find his own magic, and to rephrase it in a more direct way, he disclosed with unwavering resolve that he wished to create his own magic. He acknowledged that recreating spells was a straightforward process, but for the purpose of one day discovering and bringing forth his own magic, he wanted to fully grasp the process of producing magic. He reflected that he wanted to bring forth magic that was even more remarkable and beautiful than lineage magic as a testimony of his own existence. This was the very dream he had harbored since childhood, and the dream entrusted to him by his master. He then addressed Jurgen's second concern, explaining the reason he helped Caddy was because of her unwavering kindness. He stated that despite being outnumbered and in a challenging situation, she still had the grace to suggest Herms not get involved in an unsightly dispute. The moment he heard that, he realized she hadn't changed at all. She was the same kind girl who once cheered him on through tough times. He immediately sensed that someone like that could not be capable of a crime, which was precisely why he intervened and helped her. After he concluded, he asked if his reason was too flimsy, and Jurgen nodded in agreement, stating it was rather naive. According to him, it was too short-sighted and simplistic to decide his actions based on a fleeting expression. However, he confessed that as a father, he was truly glad that Herms trusted his daughter that much. As he turned to address Caddy, he admitted it would be a relief to have him protecting his daughter, then sought reassurance from Caddy. Yet Caddy's face flushed with embarrassment as she quickly clarified that Hermes's thoughts about her were purely platonic. She then thanked her father for his much-needed approval and remarked that Hermes would continue to be by her side as a guard, while Jurgens playfully reminded her to keep her emotions in check, as befitted a duke's daughter. Immediately upon being assigned his room, a sprawling space with a door that led out to the balcony, Hermes found himself thinking that he had been mentally prepared to sleep outdoors on his first night, but was fortunate enough to be assigned such a magnificent room. He was surprised that things had turned out better than he expected, and he silently sent his gratitude to Caddy for this. It seemed Jurgen, the Minister of Justice, would be protesting the entire incident involving Chris, including the fact that the order had been discreetly issued by Prince Astor himself. Hermes felt the visible sense of relief, knowing the other party's actions would be restrained for the time being. Despite this reassurance, he still acknowledged the potential risks to Caddy and vowed to remain diligent and watchful in his duty as her guard. As he gazed out from the balcony, taking in the cool night air, Caddy approached and stood beside him, explaining with a soft voice that she wanted to have a more in-depth conversation since they hadn't had the opportunity. When she noticed his intense, unwavering stare, she asked what was on his mind. He revealed with quiet sincerity that he was simply admiring her beauty, a comment that caused an embarrassed flush to rise in her cheeks. Caddy pointed out that he had always been this way ever since their childhood, when he had consistently expressed his emotions with such an open sincerity. Moreover, Caddy observed a new change in his tone, remarking that it had become more distant than she remembered, and he now addressed her with a formality that had been completely absent in their childhood. To her complaints, he attempted to explain that he was now a mere commoner, and her attendant at that, believing it was best to address her more formally to maintain a sense of decency and protect their reputations. With a subtle ache of nostalgia in her voice, Caddy proposed an impossible idea, to somehow go back to their carefree childhood, a time when it was just the two of them and the pressures of appearances simply did not matter. Hearing her words, he slipped back into his old habits and affectionately called her Caddy, inquiring if she was now truly comfortable with the familiarity. Though Caddy affirmed she was, Hermes admitted he was not used to talking so plainly without making sure he sounded polite. He revealed it had been a long while since he talked like this, adding that he had been living a solitary life alone with his master in the secluded countryside. Just then, Caddy questioned what kind of person his master was. He disclosed that while he had to avoid delving into specifics about their name or social status, he could share with her that they were a rather useless person in general, but he proudly mentioned that they were truly amazing when it came to magic. As far as he was concerned, he believed his master was the greatest mage the world had ever known, a position that would remain unchanged for him. Furthermore, he asked how she had been holding up for the past 5 years, since she was Astor's fiancée, and she agreed that a lot had happened in the years after he had left. Moreover, she explained that, had she still been engaged to Astor, they would never have been permitted to spend time alone together at night, despite their deep childhood friendship and his new role as her personal guard. Herm's eyes grew wide with realization, and his doubts solidified when she revealed their engagement had been broken off just last month, and she now held the painful title of a noble's daughter who had been cast away. As the night transitioned into a new morning, Hermes emerged from his room, dressed in a stylish formal suit, and Lila showered him with praises and admiration. However, her expression clouded over as she informed him that the household staff were either much older or much younger than Caddy, leaving her with no one she could genuinely confide in. Despite being surrounded by so many people in the house, she disclosed with a heavy heart that far too many people approached her solely out of self-interest, and as a result, every single interaction had become a game of uncovering each other's true intentions. The burden of being a duke's daughter was an incredibly heavy one, so she requested that Hermes become Caddy's lifelong supporter and utilize the special connection they shared as childhood friends. Hermes thought to himself that in the 5 years he was away from the royal capital, Caddy, as a daughter of the Trokia household, have lived through difficult times and endured painful experiences. For this reason, Hermes silently pledged to remain by her side and committed to being her lifelong supporter. Just then, Caddy approached to greet him, but froze at the sight of his formal attire, a reaction that prompted her to bury her face in her hands. As Hermes caught sight of her, he inquired if he looked strange, but Caddy surprisingly requested him to keep his distance for a moment. Meanwhile, Lila secretly questioned Caddy what she would do in the future as she was already reacting so intensely to seeing him dressed up for the first time, assuming that his dashing appearance had simply left her breathless. Flustered, Caddy told Lila to be quiet and assured her that she would do her best and get used to his appearance in no time. She then turned to him and formally requested that he look after her from that day forward, to which Hermes extended his hand and graciously accepted the weight of the responsibility. A flicker of memory stirred in Caddy's mind, echoing a desperate plea to her mother, her voice trembling as she begged her to stay by her side and never abandon her. Yet her mother had wrapped her in a tender, comforting embrace, imparting a valuable lesson that their magic was not forged for oppressing or ruling over others, but to shield their loved ones and the defenseless. To find their own happiness, they must first protect the joy of others from being snatched away. Only those with courage and a noble heart truly earn the title of nobility, and her mother had gazed at her with hope, wishing for Caddy to become a splendid and praiseworthy noble. Those were her final, heartfelt words before she slipped into the darkness, leaving her daughter alone in the shadows. Just then, Caddy's eyes fluttered open from her haunting nightmare, with tears streaming down her cheeks as she whispered softly to her mother's image in their family portrait. Meanwhile, a soldier approached Jurgen and delivered an urgent report that villagers had been wounded by monsters, though thankfully there were no fatal casualties. The soldier added that a cautious search of the nearby mountain had revealed a dungeon which was suspected to be a monster's lair. Scanning the reports with a frown, Jurgen noted that the dungeon were just beyond the border with Count Eldridge's territory. He voiced his desire to exterminate the monsters before they inflicted further damage and spread to neighboring areas, but lamented that his soldiers were already dispatched to conquering another dungeon. With few options at hand, he resolved to evacuate the villagers for the time being until reinforcements could arrive. To his astonishment, Caddy, accompanied by Hermes, stepped forward and declared her intent to go. As Jurgen attempted to restrain her, Caddy insisted that she couldn't remain passive and watch in silence while her people were facing danger. With unwavering determination shining in her eyes, she shared her deep belief that nobles gifted with lineage magic unlike commoners held the sacred duty to protect the population with their magical strength. She also claimed that she had made a firm vow to her mother to become a splendid noble who fought with all their might to protect the weak. Upon being met with her resolute words, Jurgen had no choice but to agree to his daughter's demands, acknowledging that she had always tirelessly battled fierce monsters for the people's sake. However, he urged her to return at once if she felt the situation was more dangerous, even offering to dispatch a squad of his most trusted soldiers to accompany her. Turning to Hermes, he requested with earnest concern that he take the utmost care of his daughter, and Hermes responded with assurance that he would do his best. In his silent thoughts, Hermes reflected that Caddy's mother had been a deeply kind and nurturing soul, but she had tragically lost her life when they were 6, having heroically sacrificed herself against a monstrous horde attacking the city. But even now, Caddy held her in constant thought. After a brief journey, they arrived at the rugged expanse of the specified mountain, and Caddy turned to Hermes, seeking clarification and asking if he had ever faced monsters in combat. In response, he offered reassurance, explaining that he had encountered his share of fights during his training, a deliberate regimen to sharpen his combat skills. Caddy countered with a serious tone that those monsters would persistently attack humans, even to the point of being relentless. To make the matter worse, they would continue to breed and multiply in numbers if left unattended. In her view, they represented the significant threat currently facing the country's people, aggravated by the strange, atypical structures that served as monsters' lairs, notoriously known as dungeons. Their complicated and convoluted internal layouts made them ideal places for monsters to use as their bases, and there were instances where the horde of monsters that thrived in those places could become absolute disasters. She also informed him about the possibility of obtaining rare magical tools during the conquering process. However, their conversation was abruptly cut short when one of her soldiers intervened, expressing his astonishment that her selection for bodyguard was someone so young and inexperienced. He exclaimed that Hermes, being her childhood friend, would only be a burden on their dangerous dungeon adventure and would hold them back rather than providing protection. Caddy immediately halted him and assured him that she had made Hermes her bodyguard after properly evaluating his abilities herself, emphasizing that his involvement was not driven by personal motives. To their utter surprise, Count Eldridge suddenly appeared at the location and mockingly remarked that it was a pleasure to meet the infamous defective lady of the Trochia estate. As Hermes seemed confused by his sudden appearance, Caddy informed him that Eldridge was from a neighboring territory, and the mountain range they were traversing served as the dividing line between the two countries. Caddy politely asked about his purpose for being there accompanied by his troops, but he responded with his usual disdainful tone that he should be asking her the same question. With a dismissive wave of his hand, he declared that he was marching to conquer a dungeon that his people had recently discovered through their investigation, and suggested it was best for Caddy's troops to vacate the area. Yet Caddy stood her ground and advised him to cease his jokes, reminding him that the location was specifically within her family's jurisdiction. Eldridge mockingly asserted that he had long forgotten about that ancient agreement. However, he claimed he couldn't bring himself to leave such a dangerous dungeon, said to hold strong monsters and legendary artifacts, in the hands of a defective young lady. His face twisted into a sinister grin as he implied he was willing to give her a hand conquering the dungeon out of the goodness of his heart, further mentioning that she should be thanking him in tears instead of protesting. Herm's eyes narrowed upon hearing the disrespectful remarks as he silently glared at the man, while the soldiers muttered among themselves that Eldridge was surely after the magical tools and definitely intended to steal the achievements. On the contrary, Ketty protested that despite being old, it was still an official agreement they reached through mutual consent, and she threatened to report it as an abuse of authority outside legal boundaries if he continued to obstruct their path. Yet Eldridge scoffed at her idea, remarking that no one would listen to someone as insignificant as her. He persisted in his disrespect, claiming that she was just a flawed woman who had been cast aside by their heroic prince and was not even skilled enough to wield her magic properly. The old man continued to cackle with mockery, his laughter dripping with disdain as he declared that a little girl of such low caliber presumptuously saying she would conquer a dungeon was quite hilarious, further dismissing her efforts as a mere make-believe, pretending to be a noble. However, his disrespectful comments were abruptly halted when Herms unleashed a barrage of fire magic, directing it precisely above Eldridge's head to strike a monster sneaking up behind them. With an unfazed expression, he apologized for arrogantly taking the liberty of helping him since they were in danger. One of Eldridge's soldiers was stunned upon seeing the monster, while the other expressed his amazement that a kid was able to utilize such remarkable magic without even chanting. Yet Herm's voice carried a hint of mockery as he wondered aloud what the outcome might be if they left this matter to a self-proclaimed God's chosen mage who couldn't even notice that kind of surprise attack lurking in the shadows. He further questioned if Eldridge would be kind enough to offer his expert opinion, but Eldridge's anger flared as he demanded to know how a lowly servant like Herms dared to defy him. Still, Herms maintained his composed demeanor as he remarked that he was just an uneducated kid seeking guidance. Moreover, he playfully asserted that it was unfortunate Eldridge perceived this as a challenge to his authority. But he echoed the same exact words Eldridge had spoken to Kadi, suggesting he should be thanking him in tears for his supposed assistance. Mortified by Herm's bold remarks, Eldridge made a hasty retreat, muttering a hollow threat that he would remember Herm's face and settle the score later. As Eldridge departed with his soldiers, Herms turned around and offered his apology for acting on impulse rather than thinking rationally. As Caddy attempted to thank him for his assistance, the soldier who had been berating Herms moments ago underwent a dramatic change of heart, now speaking with tearful eyes and admitting he had misjudged him. He firmly grasped Herms' hand and stated that Herms didn't tolerate any insult against Caddy, even having the courage to confront account. With a determined expression, he offered to protect Caddy alongside Herms, while Caddy expressed her pleasure that she was glad to see them on better terms, further urging them to proceed into the dungeon before the Count's party could overtake them. After a brief while, as they descended into the depths of the dungeon, Herms unleashed a remarkable display of magical prowess, swiftly dispatching the monsters that crossed their path with deadly precision with a flicker of his hand. As they ventured into the twisting hallways of the dungeon, Caddy inquired if he was currently utilizing general magic, noting that it looked stronger and more intricate than typical general magic. In response, Herms revealed that it was strengthened general magic to be precise, though he was still applying the effect of Steel of the Origin. Although it didn't pack as much power as lineage magic, Herms found it quite convenient that he could omit the chanting part and deliver his magic seamlessly. However, Caddy emphasized that the absence of chanting wasn't just a matter of convenience, but the spell's power without incantation hinted at the extraordinary nature of his magic. One of the soldiers even thanked Herms, stating that they were progressing smoothly toward the depths of the dungeon, but Herms humbly remarked that it was a collective effort of everyone's strength. Just then, as they reached the end of the hallway at a broken cliff, they stumbled across a ginormous tortoise monster lying silently right in front of them. Its massive form sprawled across the uneven ground, prompting Herms to state that this seemed to be the dungeon's formidable boss. Upon seeing its massive presence, Herms commented that this being was a tortoise dragon, looking like a tortoise but was a real, full-fledged dragon with a menacing aura. Caddy mentioned that he seemed very knowledgeable about monsters, to which Herms disclosed that he often went conquering dungeons as part of his rigorous training regimen, and that he had even fought a dragon species before. Nevertheless, Herms advised that they retreat for the time being and inform Jurgen for further instructions on what to do next. Caddy agreed to his plan, noting that although the eldritch issue weighed heavily on her mind, assembling a force was a necessary move. But before they could leave, the monster suddenly snapped its eyes open and let out an ear-piercing growl that echoed through the dungeon, leaving the others utterly stunned. Just as the monster struck, the cliff beneath their feet began to crumble, but a radiant barrier suddenly burst forth and enveloped them, successfully shielding them from the collapse. However, a far more urgent threat arose as the gigantic monster towered directly before them with a menacing presence. As the towering creature lunged forward with its massive body rumbling toward them, the soldier intercepted it with his own sword, remarking with awe at the creature's surprising agility despite its enormous size. On the other hand, when Hermes took charge and unleashed his own magic to strike the beast, he discovered that the creature's defenses were remarkably resilient, as his attack barely left a mark, let alone a single scratch on its scaly exterior. A soldier exclaimed with urgency that they couldn't deliver a good blow by themselves and their attacks were proving ineffective, immediately requesting Caddy's assistance in using her lineage magic. Caddy instantly complied and began her incantation, releasing her bloodline magic with a burst of energy and attempting to strike the beast with all her might. Yet the creature's speed proved truly impressive as it effortlessly sidestepped her attack, leaving her genuinely puzzled. To her surprise, Hermes appeared in an instant and activated his magic, Blood Chain, to restrain the beast in place with shimmering magical chains, giving Caddy's magic the opportunity to strike it with considerable force. To their utter astonishment, all of their efforts proved futile since the monstrous creature conjured multiple magical barriers, effectively shielding itself from Caddy's attack from every angle. Meanwhile, witnessing its overwhelming destructive power and strong magic mirroring the intensity of lineage magic, Hermes realized it was similar to the battle they had faced in the past, specifically a year ago. Upon encountering a ferocious red dragon during a dungeon exploration with Rose, no magic had seemed to affect the creature despite their best efforts. Hence he realized that the key to defeating this formidable foe lay in the same strategy he had used to defeat that red dragon. As the monster seemed to overpower them with considerable force, the soldier immediately advised Caddy to seize the opportunity to escape the dungeon with Hermes, while they bought them some time in the process. Caddy instantly refused and asserted that she couldn't escape alone and leave them behind, but he emphasized that she wouldn't be fleeing, but rather going to call for reinforcements. As the monster's relentless assault made their situation increasingly dire, she wondered if they'd last long enough for reinforcements to arrive. As her mind raced with worry, she desperately searched for a solution, and even the fleeting thought of her mother crossed her mind before Hermes stepped in just in time to assist her. He immediately informed her that there existed only one strike that could pierce through that impenetrable barrier, though it required a buildup of energy and a specific incantation before it could be fully unleashed with precision. In a stern tone, Hermes requested everyone to immobilize it for a fleeting 5 seconds, and with perfect timing, Hermes unleashed his magic and expertly leaped above the beast, casting his own spell to neutralize its glowing protective barrier. Meanwhile, the soldiers muttered among themselves, commenting on Hermes' swift agility and marveling at how he was effortlessly strengthening his body with a radiant glow of magic. To their surprise, as the monster began to whip its massive, scaly tail to strike Hermes, the soldier sprang into action and swiftly deflected it with his sword, leaving the creature grunting in pain and collapsing to its knees with a heavy thud. Caddy seized the opening and swiftly launched her magical attack at the beast, only to have it deflected once more by its resilient barrier. Caddy thought to herself that the best she could do was to momentarily suppress it with her magic, but she now sensed her magic power swaying at its limit. In the perfect moment, Hermes arrived on the scene and noted that they had managed to buy him sufficient time to prepare the attack. Without wasting another moment, he launched into his incantation and released a mighty blast of alternate dragon breath, sending a wave of scorching flames at the beast and gradually shattering its barrier under the intense heat that lit up the dungeon. As the fire extinguished and the smoke cleared from the hazy air, the group surveyed the scene and found no sign of life from that beast, leaving the soldiers declaring their victory over the formidable boss monster. Meanwhile, Hermes revealed that the magic he wielded was borrowed from a red dragon he battled before in another dungeon, explaining that the steel of the origin could recreate any form of magic, and the magic that monsters used was no exception. Magic wielded by high-ranking monsters was extremely powerful to the extent that it could even surpass lineage magic at certain instances. Yet Caddy's hand trembled at the display of such blazing power, and she whispered that his transformation into a magnificent mage was nothing short of impressive. But she couldn't help but mention that her own abilities paled in comparison to his. As her expression turned somber, Hermes made an attempt to boost her spirit, stating she had played a significant role in the battle and had undoubtedly contributed to defeating the foe. Her voice quivered as she confided in him that she was referred to as a defective woman who couldn't wield magic. Among the House of Troikia's legacy, the inherent lineage magic was considered one of the strongest kinds, potent enough to even defeat dragon species, but she declared with a bitter tone that she was only capable of producing the same level of power she had demonstrated previously. She believed that she had exposed them all to danger because of her own weaknesses, and that Hermes would be thoroughly disappointed by her feeble performance. Seeing her so disheartened, Hermes' expression turned firm as he inquired whether she ever felt disappointed in him when he was deemed to have zero aptitude in the past, enduring the utter disdain and disrespect from those around him. Noticing her surprised reaction, he offered a soft smile as he reassured her that his response mirrored hers, that he wasn't disappointed in her. Still, she rationalized that her previous thoughts stemmed from the belief that it was impossible for him to be anything less than a great mage. Hermes swiftly echoed her sentiment, asserting that people who worked diligently toward their goals, especially someone as dedicated as she was, were destined to achieve greatness as a mage. However, he admitted that something seemed to be interfering with her magic, and after a brief moment of contemplation, he gently questioned whether she would be willing to let him recreate her magic with his own abilities. When Caddy inquired about the purpose of recreating her magic, Hermes explained in a calm manner that to successfully use his Steel of the Origin, he needed to gain a deep understanding of her spell. He elaborated that his study would be so thorough as to include aspects that even she, the one born with the power, would likely be unaware of, emphasizing that this was a fundamental weakness of lineage magic. Similarly to how humans perform physical functions like movements and respiration without comprehending the intricate internal workings, mages with lineage magic could often use their spells without truly grasping their nature. For that reason, they were unable to notice hidden effects or correct any misunderstandings they might have about their power. He suspected this was the very reason behind Caddy's struggles to wield her magic effectively and assured her he would ascertain the cause of the malfunction. However, their conversation was abruptly interrupted by the sudden arrival of Eldridge, who sneered and remarked that their efforts had saved him a lot of trouble, seeing as the dungeon's boss monster had already been defeated. As Caddy burst out in protest and tried to halt him, the man ignored her completely and continued towards a magnificent artifact that stood directly in front of them. He wondered aloud that if he were to present it to the royal family, he would obtain an immense reward, be it treasures, territory, or even a promotion in his peerage. Caddy's protests grew louder as she exclaimed that her people were the ones who had conquered the dungeon, complaining that he was going too far by attempting to steal their credit. Her words finally made Eldridge's anger erupt, and he yelled back that any monster ordinary people like them could overcome would have been no match for him, retorting that he was supposed to have conquered the dungeon first and that they were the ones who had stolen his glory. Caddy suggested he cease pushing such unreasonable ideas, and pointing towards the dragon's carcass, she remarked that a magic appraisal would provide all the evidence needed to prove that they were undeniably the victors. Eldridge's lips curled into a sly grin as he mentioned he could simply destroy all the evidence, including the carcass, asserting that there were no other witnesses in a dungeon so deep in the mountains. His eyes flashed with arrogance as he invoked his spells, his lineage magic dominating the air around them as he challenged them to oppose him with their feeble abilities if they felt frustrated. He proclaimed with mocking certainty that a defective woman like her would never be able to break through his spell, declaring that magical strength was the decisive factor in ruling the country, and weaklings had no right to say anything. He stated that in the highly unlikely event their magic surpassed his own, he would acknowledge their points as valid and back down. Though it was annoying to admit, Eldridge's magic was undeniably formidable, and Caddy knew she had to find a way to overcome the situation. It was then that Hermes offered his advice, informing her that the activation of magic was greatly influenced by the caster's emotions. He emphasized that one reason she couldn't utilize her magic properly might be due to her feelings being in disarray, stressing that the authenticity of one's emotions was crucial for infusing spells with additional power. He explained that people were often surprisingly unable to grasp their own true feelings, becoming thrown into disarray by suppressed intentions or giving priority to ideals that restrained them. Following his explanation, he posed a simple question. Why was she trying to use her magic at this particular moment? The question caused her to reflect, and she realized she was acting out of a desire to put an end to the Count's relentless provocations. However, she recognized that this was a processed intention, just as Hermes had described. It then dawned on her that she had been bottling up her true feelings for a long time, completely absorbed in the ideal of being a splendid noble and fulfilling her obligations. As she finally acknowledged her underlying true emotions, her magic burst forth, shrouding her in a dark, unfamiliar aura that startled Eldridge. Her voice, no longer restrained, was filled with pure fury as she proclaimed how infuriating it was that he had the audacity to barge in and do as he pleased, when it was they who had poured their hearts and souls into the fight. She called him vile for attempting to snatch the credit after doing nothing himself, and for adding insult to injury by ridiculing Hermes and the others who had bravely put their lives on the line. Eldridge was caught off guard, remarking that her magic was unlike anything he had ever heard of, yet she simply rebuked him again and told him he should be ashamed of himself. With swift ferocity, Caddy hurled a magical onslaught at Eldridge, the attack evoking the formidable aura of multiple mighty knights charging in unison. Eldridge did not yield, though he stammered that her magic's true potency was surely mediocre despite its intimidating appearance, and he questioned if she truly dared to challenge a formidable count like himself. He then threatened that her already low reputation would sink even further, as taking such action against him would undoubtedly escalate into a major political issue. It was then that Hermes spoke, his voice calm yet carrying a subtle, intimidating tone, as he declared that in such circumstances, they would simply have to eliminate all the evidence. He reminded Eldridge of his own words, that this particular dungeon was located deep within the mountains, with no other witnesses beside themselves. As he spoke, Hermes activated his own magic, exerting his power to suspend the massive monster's corpse in midair directly above Eldridge. He explained that if Caddy's magic were to leave a residual signature, it could be traced back to her, but he then posed a threatening question. What would happen if he were to simply squash Eldridge with the corpse? He asserted that in such a case everyone would likely conclude that the Count had just pitifully fallen victim to the dungeon's monster. Eldridge stumbled back to the ground, with his face pale as he ordered Hermes to stop his foolishness and immediately dispose of the carcass. He then turned to his own soldiers and demanded to know why they weren't handling the insolent boy, only to discover that they had already been utterly defeated by Caddy's men. One of Caddy's soldiers apologized for unleashing their pent-up anger on them, explaining that their master had been severely mistreated and abused by their count. Realizing he was completely cornered and without support, Eldridge was unable to utter a single word, and Hermes took the opportunity to issue one final command to back off. With no other choice, Eldridge raised his hands in surrender and acknowledged that the artifact now belonged to Caddy. With Eldridge and his remaining men gone, Caddy's soldiers expressed their relief, while Caddy herself immediately approached Hermes, inquiring if he had actually done something to her magic, as it was the first time she had ever wielded it with such remarkable strength. However, Hermes insisted that it was undoubtedly a testament to her own abilities, claiming with sincerity that it was the most beautiful execution of her magic he had ever seen. A genuine sense of pride and satisfaction washed over Caddy at his words of praise, though he added that he believed it was still not the full extent of her power. Sharing his sentiment, she agreed that despite being a magical legacy passed down through generations, it still seemed quite lacking. Moreover, she eagerly inquired if he could help her unlock the rest of its potential, and he responded with self-assurance that he believed it was possible, though he added that there were personal intentions involved, as he himself wished to one day wield her magnificent magic through his own abilities. Caddy agreed without hesitation, remarking that it was a small price to pay in return for all he had done for her. And with that concluded, the dungeon challenge was overcome, and they had successfully emerged victorious. Several days after the incident, on a serene day at the Duke's residence, Caddy was sipping black tea that had been specially brewed by Hermes. She praised him on the delicious cup of tea, and he simply informed her that he used to make it for his master all the time. The servant Lila, who was standing nearby, seemed quite amazed by his exceptional domestic skills, stating that he could handle household chores as flawlessly as a trained maid, in addition to being so magically impressive. Hermes expressed his gratitude, remarking that he felt lucky to be accommodated at the residence and had made it his priority to be as helpful as possible. He then turned to Caddy with genuine sincerity, offering himself completely at her disposal and assuring her that she should feel free to instruct him as she saw fit. The sudden formal declaration caused Caddy to choke on her tea, and Hermes hurriedly rushed off to bring a new tablecloth. Once he was gone, Layla remarked that from any perspective, it was clear Caddy had fallen in love with him. She gently urged her mistress to be sincere with her emotions and reveal her true feelings, but Caddy abruptly refused, explaining that their social statuses were completely different now, and that their circumstances and positions had changed too much. Additionally, Caddy sensed that Hermes' perspective on her had also shifted from what it was before. With a somber expression, she asserted that she was now in the difficult position of having her engagement to a prince broken off just a month ago, and she couldn't bear the thought of Herms perceiving her as a flawed woman as well. Moved by her distress, Layla enveloped her in a warm hug, but Cady continued to express her concerns, lamenting that Herms seemed to have grown mature far too fast. She reminisced about the cheerful and innocent boy he used to be, while the current Hermes seemed to be holding back his emotions, and she longed for him to show a stronger, less formal interest in her. While he did praise her abilities and admire her beauty, his compliments felt too casual, and she was not satisfied with that. Layla listened, perceiving that what Cady truly wanted was to see his more bashful and confused side again, to see those naive and adorable reactions she remembered. After a moment of careful consideration, Layla proposed a simple yet bold solution, that Cady should just ask Herms out on a date, a suggestion that rendered her momentarily speechless. With a glint in her eyes, Layla suggested that Cady should merrily go around the royal capital together, like kids their age did, to show Herms how truly charming she actually was. She proposed the idea that Cady should inform Herms they would be conducting a preliminary inspection of the royal capital as a pretext for the outing. Moreover, with a firm expression, she pointed out the visible weariness in Cady's face and exclaimed that she had not taken any rest after conquering the dungeon, and had also been reading the monster damage report until late into the night. Layla recommended that Cady should take breaks more often, gently mentioning that Lord Jurgen was also deeply concerned about her well-being. When Cady pressed her for more, Layla revealed with a softened voice that during their earlier conversation, Jurgen had confided in her that Cady had been trying to fulfill her responsibilities as a noble since the loss of his wife, but he also sensed that the process was stripping her of her youthful liberty and happiness, and he couldn't help but feel a deep regret as her father. Cady was utterly taken aback by her father's heartfelt words, and Layla advised that Cady deserved to behave like a typical girl her age, to let loose and have a good time, and prove to her father that she was also capable of having fun. After listening to such considerate remarks, Cady's resolve hardened, and she assured Layla that she would try her best to ask Herms out on a date. On the following day, they ventured out into the city, and a warm wave of nostalgia washed over Herms as he encountered a familiar scene from his childhood. He expressed his sincere gratitude to Cady for the opportunity, stating that he himself had been considering taking some time to sightsee the royal capital at least once. Meanwhile, a sudden memory of Layla's earlier reassurance regarding her engagement annulment flooded Cady's mind, a memory in which Layla had asserted that everyone very well knew Cady and Aster had never shared any romantic feelings to begin with. Cady had pointed out that Aster had been the one to seek her first and propose the engagement, so it was only fitting that he be the one to call it off, further reassuring Cady that there was no disgrace in the situation and she should not fret about it. Yet a quiet doubt still lingered in Cady's mind, as she wondered if it was really okay for her to be honest about her feelings. Keeping Herm's earlier words of acknowledgement in her mind, she mustered up her courage and slowly reached for his hand, her shy, hesitant touch leaving him surprised. Smoothly playing it off, she remarked that there was a huge crowd in the royal capital, claiming it was just a safety measure to ensure that they wouldn't get separated amidst the sea of people. Shortly after, they navigated together through the bustling market street, and Cady told him that he would visit the area more frequently to run errands and purchase necessary goods. She also familiarized him with the residential area and informed him that it was quite easy to get lost in the back alleys, considering how intricate they were. As they strolled together, Herms couldn't help but feel nostalgic, reminiscing about their past adventures together and recalling how Cady used to often drag him out of his books to explore the world. A quiet, joyful smile lit up Herms's face as he thought to himself that it was only natural to feel a slight bit embarrassed and self-conscious, given the warm pressure of Cady's hand in his. Out of nowhere, a store owner appeared from a nearby shop and extended a warm and grateful greeting, her face beaming with deep appreciation for Cady's invaluable help. Noticing Herms's confusion, Cady clarified that the woman was referring to a minor incident that took place before his arrival to the royal capital, but the woman immediately intervened and remarked that it was far from being a minor issue, since Cady's much-needed intervention had helped prevent their store from going out of business. She went on to disclose that they were in trouble when replenishing their store's products since they hadn't realized their supplier was a corrupted vendor. On top of being an immoral salesman who sold them fake jewels, he was also charging them astronomical prices. She recounted how they were on the very brink of financial disaster, but fortunately, Cady had coincidentally stumbled upon them and saved them from ruin. Herms was thoroughly impressed by her compassion, while Cady mentioned that protecting the people was her obligation as a noble after all, yet the woman emphasized that a normal noble wouldn't have bothered with a mere store like theirs. Moreover, catching sight of their clasped hands, she playfully inquired if they were on a secret date, causing Caddy's face to redden as she hurriedly clarified his position as her new attendant. Just then, the woman graciously invited them into her store and shared with pride that they had even managed to sell their exclusive jewelry pieces to noble families. The woman politely asked Caddy if she had spotted something from their extensive selection that managed to capture her attention, but Caddy confessed that she wasn't particularly knowledgeable when it came to those kinds of items. The woman's surprise was evident as she remarked that a noble lady as graceful as Caddy seemed uninterested in such finery, but Caddy explained that while she delighted in fashion and dressing with elegance, it had never been a necessity for her. No matter how exquisitely she adorned herself, Astor was not the kind of man to spare even a fleeting glance her way. Just then, Hermes shared to her that he personally took pleasure in admiring beautiful things, confiding that his deep fascination with magic came from viewing it as a mesmerizing and intricate art form. His eyes sparkled with warmth as he added that seeing someone as beautiful as Caddy become even more radiant, perhaps by wearing a single piece of jewelry, would be a truly captivating sight. His earnest compliment left her cheeks flushed and momentarily speechless, while the woman behind them teasingly remarked that the atmosphere was growing rather intense. At this, Caddy's face burned with embarrassment as she hurriedly guided Hermes out of the shop and quickly promised the lady she would return some other time. Upon arriving home that evening, Caddy flopped onto her soft bed, burying her face in the pillow and grumbling about how Hermes could utter something so embarrassing in public with such calm confidence. Standing nearby, Layla let out a soft chuckle and playfully remarked that Hermes' behavior went far beyond than seeming mature. Yet the memory of Hermes' heartfelt words surged back into Caddy's mind, prompting her to eagerly ask Layla about the grand party scheduled to take place. Layla revealed it was a splendid celebration in Caddy's honor, commemorating her presentation of a magnificent artifact to the royal family. However, Caddy clarified that she was speaking about the attire she would wear that day, requesting Layla to choose the most suitable outfit and assist her in preparing elegantly for the celebration. Layla was deeply touched by this sudden request, as she couldn't believe that Caddy, who usually prioritized her time and work above all else, was seeking her help to dress up for the occasion. Furthermore, Caddy also asked her to select a special accessory from a specific shop. Nevertheless, the day of the grand celebration finally arrived, and the mansion came alive with the presence of esteemed nobles, while Hermes, standing at a distance and surveying the crowd, contemplated whether it was truly appropriate for him to take on the role of Caddy's company. Just then, his gaze fell upon Caddy, and his eyes widened in awe at her captivating attire and delightful appearance. As she approached him, she asked for his opinion on her look, but his voice caught in his throat as he struggled to find words to capture her stunning beauty. Yet, as he gently took her hand, he expressed that he was fully aware he should be showering her with praises, but he sought her forgiveness, confessing that words to describe how exquisite she looked were not coming to his mind. With genuine admiration, he warmly complimented her, stating that she looked truly breathtaking, which left Caddy utterly speechless. Moreover, other nobles present at the event discussed her beauty among themselves, declaring that she would undoubtedly become an unmatched beauty in the future. Additionally, they praised her knowledge and flawless cultivation, but despite having all these qualities in her favor, they felt sympathy for her due to her limited magical abilities. Yet another man brought up a rumor about her working to overcome her magical shortcomings, stating that she had supposedly repelled Count Eldridge, who was attempting to steal her achievements with the raw skills of her lineage magic. Hermes overheard their gossip about Caddy and noted that nearly everyone was engrossed in discussions about her. Just then, Jurgen walked up to him and extended a pleasant greeting, revealing that he had heard from Caddy that Hermes had played a significant role in helping her overcome her magical flaws. However, Hermes humbly acknowledged that he had merely provided her with the opportunity to discover her own potential, but Jurgen insisted that her progress would not have been possible without his invaluable assistance. Jurgen expressed his deepest gratitude, admitting that he had not been mistaken in placing his trust and expectations in him. Just then, curiosity overcame Hermes as he inquired why Jurgen had chosen to place his faith in him. He remarked that he had given Jurgen's words some deep thought and believed there was indeed a high possibility that Hermes was feigning alliance while secretly remaining loyal to the House of Friendbreed, just as Jurgen had suspected earlier. Yet Jurgen had taken him in despite those lingering doubts shadowing his mind. However, Jurgen's response was straightforward, as he revealed that he had offered shelter due to Hermes' genuine and unwavering trust in his daughter. But he added that if there was another reason, he confided that he had a general sense of who Hermes' master might truly be. This revelation left Hermes truly startled, his eyes widening in surprise, and as he pressed for more clarification, Jurgen stated with certainty that the person capable of granting him such extraordinary magic could only be that woman, though he deliberately refrained from specifying her name. However, he asked Hermes to rest assured, believing that no one else would discern the connection between Hermes and that individual. Moreover, he disclosed that his late wife had once shared a past connection with her before her passing. With their brief conversation concluded, Jurgen suggested Hermes go to where Kadi was, and as Hermes strode further down the quiet stairs, he contemplated that he hadn't anticipated Jurgen would likely piece together who he was referring to despite the lack of specifics, further deducing that Jurgen was likely more than just an ordinary figure. Just then, he stumbled across Kadi with another person, and when he inquired about his identity, the man delightedly introduced himself as Karl von Hartnett, an esteemed count from the West with a warm smile. Kadi informed him that Karl had approached her with an intention of a marriage proposal, and it seemed he had also heard about her overcoming her flaws and utilizing magical abilities. Karl continued to press his request, insisting she meet his son at least once with eager persistence, but Kadi informed the man with a stern expression that Astor, the second prince, had broken off their engagement just a month ago. She suggested Karl take that into account and reconsider his proposal, but Karl persisted and held firm to his prospect nonetheless with unwavering resolve. He proclaimed that Kadi's resourcefulness surpassed Astor's expectations and was truly splendid, further questioning aloud how he could let go of such a beautiful woman brimming with talent. He also remarked that Astor had definitely gone too far with the annulment of their engagement. In a surprising turn of events, Astor arrived on the scene with a sharp presence, questioning Karl's audacity to make such a bold remark behind his back, and Herm's eyes grew wide upon seeing him as he wondered if this person was Kadi's former fiancé, Prince Astor, and the very person largely responsible for his banishment. A wave of collective whispers swept through the grand hall as the second prince made his sudden entrance, while Hermes quietly wondered to himself about the purpose behind his sudden arrival at the party held to celebrate Kadi's hard-earned achievements. On the other hand, with a knowing glance, Kadi's attention shifted to the girl standing beside Astor, known as Sarah von Hartmann. Just then, Astor turned to Karl and declared with a stern expression that Kadi was a woman he had deemed worthless, his voice cutting through the air as he questioned whether Karl fully realized that approaching her with a marriage proposal was equivalent to defying Astor's judgment and will. Karl hastily tried to explain that he had merely overheard a rumor about Kadi, but Astor dismissed him as foolish for believing such a fleeting whisper. He then gestured toward the nobles attending Kadi's celebratory party, his gaze sweeping the crowd as he noted that he would typically examine everyone critically and hold them accountable under normal circumstances. However, he announced with a resolute voice that the purpose of his arrival was to explicitly correct the foolish misconception now harbored by all. He then turned to Karl with intensity and exclaimed loudly that his words and actions clearly implied a long-held intention to rebel against him. As Astor publicly denounced him a criminal and instructed his guards to apprehend him, Karl pleaded desperately that it was all a huge misunderstanding, his voice breaking as he begged for forgiveness. Meanwhile, Hermes thought to himself that Astor indeed had a knack for finding an excuse to falsely accuse someone. Astor then shifted his attention to Kadi and mentioned that he'd also caught wind of rumors about her, claiming she had successfully overcome the flaws in her lineage magic, subdued a dragon species in a dungeon, and brought back a rare artifact. However, he remarked with a dismissive tone that she seemed to have gotten carried away, letting her recent accomplishments inflate her ego with such a weak display of power. He questioned whether she truly valued being his fiancée and missed the position that much. Before Kadi could explain herself, Astor abruptly cut her short and commanded her to hold her tongue, asserting furiously that she always tried to bend words with sophistries and steer the conversation toward directions that favored her the most. He declared with certainty that any attempts on her part would be futile, affirming that he would never consider engaging with her again since he had already found the best match for him. He then introduced his new fiancée Sarah to the crowd and remarked that she was the daughter of a noble, and with the mention of her surname, the bystanders murmured among themselves, recognizing her as a member of the House of Baron. With a smirk, he commented that Sarah's lowly family background was of little consequence because she was beautiful, kind, and more importantly, her magic abilities far surpassed Kadi's mediocre talent. Just then, Hermes discreetly questioned whether Sarah was her acquaintance, and Kadi affirmed his doubts, explaining that they had attended the same class at school. Surprisingly, Kadi asked Sarah whether she was absolutely certain about becoming engaged to a member of the royal family, cautioning that it wasn't as glorious and enchanting as it seemed, but rather a complex reality. With an unyielding gaze, she pressed Sarah to confirm if she had the resolve to take on all the responsibilities and challenges that came with it. With a sharp, commanding tone, Astor abruptly told Caddy to cease her ridiculous comments, skillfully turning the crowd against her by accusing her of being consumed by jealousy towards Sarah's magic, which he claimed dated back to their school days with a pointed glare. He falsely criticized her, alleging that Caddy had once exploited her position for selfish purposes and repeatedly bullied Sarah. Upon hearing his words, the bystanders exchanged questioning glances as they murmured among themselves, debating that there might be some truth to it if the prince himself was raising such serious concerns. Herms attempted to persuade Caddy to speak up, but she dismissed the idea, expressing the harsh truth that no one would dare to doubt the prince's words no matter how much they tried to disapprove of him. With a terrifying, unyielding gaze, Astor silently pressured Sarah into confirming his statement before the crowd, and her eyes met his with absolute dread. With no other options at hand, Sarah's body trembled with fear, and she stammered over her barely audible words as she reluctantly agreed to his statement. Upon her confirmation, Astor further declared that lineage magic was a divine gift bestowed upon them by God, and if one failed to utilize it effectively, it could be taken as direct, undeniable proof that they lacked divine blessings. With an authoritative stance, Astor demanded to know if they truly believe that a woman like Caddy, continuously labeled the defective young lady, could suddenly have awakened her hidden potential, further exclaiming that she must have employed some kind of atrocious trick to achieve it. Astor's speech effectively influenced the bystanders as they began to question Caddy's accomplishments, their voices rising with doubt as they stated that it all seemed rather too convenient for her to defeat a dragon species and bring back an artifact. Meanwhile, Herms was truly astonished at how blindly they swallowed Astor's blunt claims without a second thought. Just then, their whispers were abruptly halted when a disheveled man suddenly barged into the mansion, informing everyone that a ferocious monster had suddenly descended upon the assembly hall grounds and was causing havoc. As both Herms and Caddy hurried to check on the situation, Herms' eyes widened in horror at the sight of an enormous wyvern thrashing amidst the chaos, along with the wounded knights desperately fighting back with their swords. Yet before they could spring into action, Astor commanded Sarah to display her formidable magical abilities before everyone. However, seeing Astor immediately taking the lead and moving forward with purpose, Caddy voiced her suspicion, wondering aloud if Astor had known about this from the beginning, and if it was a deliberate setup. A wyvern suddenly attacking the meeting hall, with Astor and his company conveniently nearby at this time, the evidence pointed to something more than just a mere coincidence. With Astor's firm command, Sarah activated her lineage magic, chanting an incantation that summoned a restorative aura, its gentle glow enveloping the hall and instantly healing the wounded soldiers with a soothing light. Meanwhile, a more urgent matter loomed before them as the wyvern suddenly lunged at them with fierce intensity, but Sarah swiftly began another incantation on Astor's command, prompting Herms to notice she was using a different lineage magic spell, leading him to speculate with growing curiosity whether she possessed dual aptitude in magic. With her incantation completed, Sarah effectively summoned a massive cage, its iron bars shining as they encased the wyvern successfully and trapped it from all sides. Just then, Astor stepped forward with confidence and declared his intention to take on the beast, beginning his spellcasting and invoking his lineage magic to summon a barrage of flames that consumed the creature in a fiery embrace. With a sinister smirk, Astor proclaimed that the monster's luck had run out the moment it appeared before him. The monster's body burned within his fiery wrath as the inferno intensified that illuminated the entire mansion with a blinding light. As the creature lay defeated before them, the bystanders erupted into cheers and praised Astor's high and mighty lineage magic, acknowledging it as the most remarkable and strongest force in history. Meanwhile, in a firm tone that echoed through the hall, he swore that monsters would never terrorize that land again as long as the country remained under his watchful gaze, further publicly announcing his engagement to Sarah von Hartmann, deeming her the faithful partner who would support him on his path to supremacy. Unexpectedly, Chris stood nearby and remarked that Hermes should have realized by now that everything in that country was decided by the strength of one's lineage magic, and that Astor's words carried truth precisely because he wielded outstanding lineage magic with undeniable power. On the other hand, Hermes stood speechless with the current state of the country's noble society. Rose's harsh words about the nobles proved true. They were content with what was handed to them since birth, lacked independent thoughts, and this being a gathering place for despicable and lazy souls. That was the disheartening truth of the royal capital, but seeing the reality vividly with his own eyes now, he thoroughly understood the gravity of Rose's words. The surrounding bystanders also cheered loudly for Sarah and labeled her as the Holy Maiden, exclaiming that she truly possessed the saintly quality of esteemed maidens from ancient fairy tales, and that she embodied the pure essence of nobility perfectly suited for their nation. Yet the praises and enthusiastic cheers didn't seem to reach Sarah, and her fragile composure faltered as she trembled with a visible, silent fear. On the other hand, Aster's lips curled into a sneer as he instructed her in a low tone to actively respond to their cheers and lift her head high. In a sudden twist of events, Aster's self-assurance shattered as he felt an unsettling presence pierce through his very being, and as he abruptly turned around, he unexpectedly met Herm's cold, unwavering gaze. The haunting familiarity of the sensation triggered Aster's temper, as he erupted into a furious questioning, challenging Hermes to explain his audacity to stare at the second prince in such an insolent manner. Yet Hermes's gaze remained fixed with quiet resolution as he stood his ground and responded that he was Kadi's servant and introduced himself formally, leaving Aster extremely perplexed. Yet moments later, Aster burst into a harsh, disdainful laughter as he instantly recognized Hermes from the Friendbride family, further mockingly remarking that a flawed lady had picked up a loser as her servant. Meanwhile, Hermes thought to himself with a trace of bitterness that he was deemed not even worthy enough for Aster to spare a glance at him, further wondering that he hadn't anticipated the person responsible for his banishment to be that much of a nuisance. Raising his voice for the crowd to hear, Aster persisted in his false claims, declaring loudly that Hermes was expelled from the Friendbride family, and Kadi had her engagement annulled, asserting that their conspiracy was motivated by malice, and they had sold their souls to the demons to acquire power. He accused them of trying to publicly claim credit for defeating the monsters, although they had clearly resorted to forbidden, malicious powers. Kadi's voice immediately cut in as she attempted to intervene, but as she struggled to defend herself, she was abruptly silenced by other nobles, their voices rising in unison as they accused her of disrespecting the prince, and declared that they had lost all faith in her. Aster swiftly announced their apprehension, and just as the situation was on the brink of escalating, Jurgen's powerful voice cut through the commotion as he burst onto the scene and swiftly intervened to caution Aster against making any hasty decision. In a bold and unflinching tone, Aster questioned whether Jurgen was attempting to exploit his authority to conceal his daughter's wrongdoings, but Jurgen retorted in a dismissive tone that he was free to interpret the situation however he chose. However, he clarified a fundamental law of the kingdom, that under any circumstances, arresting a citizen without formal charges was strictly prohibited, regardless of the influential position Aster held. He also revealed that the Earl of Hartnett, whom Aster had captured earlier, was also released under his authority, stating with authority that his actions went beyond simply granting his daughter special treatment. Upon hearing his firm statement, Aster was left with no immediate choice at his disposal, so he made the decision to leave Kadi and the others, emphasizing that they had dodged a bullet for the time being. As Aster and the resentful nobles took their leave, Chris approached Hermes and Kadi with a mischievous glint in his eyes, noting with a scoff that Hermes certainly had managed to make a mess. However, Hermes' eyes narrowed as he wondered aloud whether Chris was truly as unaffected by the situation as he appeared, further stating that they had clearly seen Aster cleverly twisting the facts to serve his own purpose. He proclaimed it as absurd that the surrounding nobles were blindly showering such a manipulative prince with praises without even stopping to think critically or form their own opinions. He wondered if Chris did not genuinely find it strange how the country was being governed, but Chris bluntly responded that this was simply the way the national system functioned, and that individuals with superior bloodlines wielded their magic to exert their dominance over the commoners. He believed that Aster wielded the ultimate power over the people, despite opposition from incompetent individuals like Hermes. Before departing, Chris concluded by declaring that unskilled individuals like him posed the greatest threat to the kingdom, and that Hermes would definitely come to realize this truth through bitter experience. Meanwhile, Kadi apologized for the trouble that had unfolded as Hermes turned to offer her consolation, remarking that Aster's lineage magic was still as formidable as ever to take down a ginormous wyvern in a single decisive blow. Yet Hermes shared his honest belief that while Aster's raw power was indeed impressive, he remained insufficient in certain critical aspects. During Aster's initial fight with the wyvern, Hermes had observed that his power was not much different from what Eldridge had displayed the other day, and that his tactic was nothing more than unrestrained brute force, relying purely on raw magical prowess. Nevertheless, Hermes still considered himself lacking in comparison with his current magic, and that he wasn't yet able to match the extraordinary magical abilities that flowed so naturally through Aster's veins. Moreover, his expression softened as he confided in Kadi that although defeating Aster right away might be impossible, he mentioned with certainty that his magic, the Emerald Tablet Steel of the Origin, grew infinitely stronger with each bloodline magic it absorbed. With fiery passion igniting his gaze, he proclaimed that he would undoubtedly surpass Prince Aster with his own magic, to make a full rectification of Aster's mistakes, and to stand even against his own brother who followed so blindly. He was utterly determined to bring everything to a conclusion, and in a gesture of shared resolve, he inspired Caddy to demonstrate their legitimate abilities and urged her to showcase their true strength to the world. In turn, Caddy's face lit up with a renewed fire and passion as she eagerly accepted his motivational words. Resolved to reclaim Caddy's lost reputation, both Hermes and Caddy embarked on a journey across the diverse region, undertaking numerous requests. They undertook monster extermination tasks that other nobles couldn't handle and investigated the mysterious labyrinth that seemed to belong to no one, believing that those steady, diligent efforts would slowly but surely change the public's opinions. On one particular day, after accepting a distressing rescue quest, they promptly departed for a distant village where they stumbled upon a strange, young girl facing a life-threatening attack by a ferocious pack of wolves. Acting with timely precision, Caddy intervened immediately, shielding the girl from the aggressive threat and actively producing her bloodline magic to dispel the wolves with a powerful blow. After successfully driving the wolves away, Caddy extended a helping hand and safely accompanied the girl to her guardian, a grizzled man who expressed his deepest gratitude for saving his granddaughter's life. Putting the rescue aside, Hermes pointed out the unsettling fact that the reports of monsters appearing in human settlements were indeed true. Caddy countered that it was a stampede, explaining that when monsters bred inside the labyrinth and exceeded a certain numerical limit, they would burst forth from the labyrinth's depths and spill out onto the surface, posing a significant and immediate threat to humanity. She exclaimed that it was utterly unacceptable to leave the situation unchecked, especially when the neighboring residents were still suffering from those monstrous attacks. She then turned to the man, the reputable mayor of the village, and respectfully informed him that the situation had spiraled out of control because the labyrinth had been neglected for far too long, prompting her to ask if he had reported this grave condition to the head of the village. The mayor immediately affirmed, mentioning that the villagers had discovered a structure believed to be a dungeon in the nearby forest about 2 weeks ago, and had immediately sought help from the head, Baron Norsha. But despite a seemingly endless wait, the anticipated rescue team never arrived. He admitted that it was beyond their capabilities to handle without adequate military support, but despite consistently contacting them for assistance, their only response was a disappointing instruction to handle the situation themselves for the time being. He further handed her the official letter from the Baron, and as she read its content thoroughly, her eyes flashed with a hint of deep annoyance and simmering anger as she stressed that disregarding the damage was utterly unacceptable. Moreover, she questioned him about Baron's whereabouts, to which he explained that Baron had recently begun constructing a frontline base just a short distance from the village, adding that he would likely be found at the base. With a commanding tone, she informed Hermes that they would be taking matters into their own hands and would confront Baron directly. However, while making their way through the dense forest, Hermes abruptly detected the presence of someone mysterious lurking behind them. After successfully arriving at the base, they were taken aback upon discovering that the entire area was desolate and abandoned, with Count Baron's absence being particularly notable. A chilling stillness hung in the air, and a disoriented Kadi pointed out that the area was stripped bare of supplies and weapons, deepening her confusion over the disappearance of the officials before the monster hunt had even concluded. Just then, Hermes's fine intuition detected a sinister presence once again, prompting him to immediately activate his magic and, in a blur of motion, apprehend the mysterious stalker who had been discreetly tracking their every movement through the forest. Caddy instantly demanded that the man reveal his identity and who had instructed him to secretly follow them. But the man remained fiercely faithful to his master as he remarked with a disdainful and arrogant tone that he had no intention of engaging in a conversation with someone as utterly despicable as them. Upon hearing his words, a subtle threatening demeanor settled over them both, and Caddy's voice took on a deadly tone as she stated that the man's refusal to cooperate left them no choice but to resort to violence, a chilling threat that left the man utterly terrified. His supposed loyalty instantly crumbled before their menacing words, and he revealed that he had been commanded by Lord Baron himself. He disclosed the brutal truth that Baron had deliberately set Caddy up to face the monstrous horde alone, believing that if she were to meet with a miserable defeat, he and his forces could easily dispatch the remaining monsters on their own and claim all the glory for themselves, successfully stealing the spotlight from Caddy. Upon hearing the truth, Caddy remained extremely stunned, as she proceeded to question whether Baron had deliberately allowed the monstrous horde to descend upon them. Driven by a petty and malicious desire for revenge against her, her voice rose in fury as she exclaimed that the villagers had been eagerly seeking their assistance, and that precious human lives were at stake, yet Baron's priority had been fixated on her demise rather than providing crucial aid to the suffering villagers. However, the man furiously declared that it was all Caddy's fault to begin with, asserting that Baron had been busy searching for a marriage partner for his son, desperately seeking the best woman all over the country. The man further revealed that Baron had even attended the celebration at the Troikia's mansions just the other day, prompting Caddy to seek clarification whether Baron had indeed attended the party. The man affirmed her doubts and remarked that Baron had himself witnessed Astor's shocking revelation about Caddy at the mansion, exposing her deepest secrets to the entire assembly. To summarize it all, out of spite over the engagement that had abruptly dissolved before it even had the chance to begin, Count Baron now wanted to tarnish Caddy's reputation through a self-inflicted disaster. Cad retorted that the duty of the nobility was to protect the people, yet they were indulging in pointless and self-serving activities instead. In a sudden twist of events, their conversation was hastily interrupted upon the unexpected arrival of numerous horrific monsters. Witnessing the horde of creatures steadily advancing towards the village from a nearby cliff, Caddy's face hardened with resolve, and she declared that she would take on the monsters, while simultaneously making it clear that the Count would be her next opponent. After concluding her conversation, Caddy instantly rushed towards the swarm without giving Herms a chance to caution her against such a reckless decision. As she hurriedly strode further, thoughts of her beloved mother flooded her mind, leading her to reflect that her mother had always stood her ground with unwavering courage and resilience, and never once ran away from her responsibilities, despite not being a powerful sorceress. Her mother always faced the monster's horde alone, fought in countless battles, and held on until reinforcements from the capital arrived. She protected the lives of her cherished people until the very end, and even went as far as sacrificing her own life in the process, becoming an esteemed noble worthy of respect. Following in her mother's footsteps, she summoned the courage to confront the monsters head-on, and with fierce intensity, she summoned the ancient power of her lineage magic and released a ferocious aura that enveloped the surrounding air. At that very moment, Caddy's heart and mind were consumed by a single ambition. She had to become stronger to successfully safeguard those she cared about, just as her mother had selflessly done. As she continued with her relentless assaults against those formidable monsters, even as they persisted in overwhelming her, she held her ground as the intimidating aura of her lineage magic erupted ominously behind her. In an unexpected turn of events, Herms appeared in the scene, his arms gently wrapping around her and snapping her out of her intense concentration, and warned her with a soft voice that she was on the brink of being totally consumed by her own magic. Moreover, he gently reminded her that he was standing right by her side and assured her that she didn't have to face it all alone. Just then, swiftly evoking his own magic, he began chanting an incantation that Caddy immediately recognized as her own, with her eyes widening in a mixture of disbelief and surprise, and he brilliantly obliterated the monsters before them in the blink of an eye. Caddy's voice laced with amazement as she inquired whether he had truly succeeded in replicating her magic, and while Herms affirmed, he clarified that his duplication of her magic was limited to its surface-level manifestation, and he couldn't yet access its intricate depth. Nonetheless, it produced the power of an ordinary bloodline spell, a display he deemed worthy of the noble's magic-esteemed reputation. He explained to Caddy that her magic was still a work in progress, even though the effect of her lineage magic was about summoning spirits using the emotional weight of regrets as a medium and converting them into magical energy. However, as he delved into the complexities of her magic, he began to grasp that he had only scratched the surface of her magic's true capabilities and had yet to understand the full extent of her potential. When she inquired about it, he emphasized that her magic still held undiscovered potential, which simply meant that she could still become a much stronger magician. Concluding that, he redirected his attention to the more pressing monsters and suggested that they work together to overcome that crisis first. As Herms warmly extended his hand, asking for her much-needed support, her face beamed with pride and contentment as she agreed to aid him. The scene then smoothly transitioned to the Count Baron, where he was eagerly waiting in anticipation that the defective lady would come seeking their assistance. As his face twisted in anger, he remarked that Caddy had betrayed his expectations of securing a good match, further asserting that he couldn't believe she attempted to deceive the respectable nobles with her sinister magical power. Other nobles who were also present at the scene affirmed his statement and denounced Caddy as an outrageous fraud, insisting that her elimination was indeed necessary for the sake of their country. In stark contrast to that, they commended Aster's bravery for revealing Caddy's true identity, proclaiming that he was indeed destined to be a great ruler. Moreover, curiosity got the better of them as they questioned if the whispers about Aster's assistance were true, and Baron affirmed, revealing that Aster seemed to be truly worried about the villagers' well-being, and hence they could expect reinforcements to arrive promptly. They sought additional context whether he had already planned the reinforcements beforehand, to which Baron responded with a dismissive scoff that he couldn't just abandon the village and leave the situation to chaos. Just then, his face twisted in a sinister smirk as he claimed that he couldn't wait to watch the defective woman's disgraceful downfall, believing that they would receive direct recognition and honor from Aster by contributing to Caddy's ruin. However, their aspirations were cruelly shattered when Caddy and Hermes appeared before them, with Caddy delivering a sarcastic apology for not meeting their expectations. With a commanding tone, she questioned the consequences of her success, in contrast to the outcome they had been hoping for. She inquired whose responsibility it would be when he selfishly abandoned his responsibilities and left the cleanup to someone else. Stunned by her unexpected arrival, Baron couldn't comprehend how they managed to slip past those terrifying creatures without being caught, but Caddy confidently revealed that she had swiftly dispatched them all while he was indulged in pointless conversation. The nobles still couldn't believe that they had single-handedly defeated the horde of creatures, but Hermes offered a suggestion in a calm and composed manner, that they verify it themselves, since they claimed it was impossible. As Baron visibly trembled, Caddy sighed in disbelief as she declared with certainty that she was just getting started, and would continue to fly to demonstrate her abilities while they remained busy making petty excuses. As they all continued to grind their teeth in frustration, Caddy managed to restore peace and harmony back to the village. The incident of Caddy suppressing the disaster in the village quickly became a heated topic among the nobles. While there were still some individuals denying it as dark magic, the impressive results achieved so quickly made it impossible to disregard the need for re-evaluation. During a peaceful, ordinary day, as Hermes was engrossed in his routine shopping chores, his gaze suddenly fell upon a hooded individual, who was discreetly mending the wounded children with their healing magic right alongside the alley. As the kids expressed their utmost gratitude, the hooded individual gently, but explicitly requested them to keep their meeting and her healing abilities confidential. However, as she turned to depart, she accidentally encountered Hermes, who was surprised to discover that the mysterious figure was actually Sarah. Upon seeing him, she immediately recalled the chaos of the other day, and her eyes fell to the floor, her shoulders slumping slightly under the weight of his questioning gaze. Her voice was laced with remorse as she offered a quiet apology for her involvement in the events of the other day. However, Hermes' own voice was gentle as he assured her that he had no intentions of interrogating her or causing her any sort of distress. Yet, in a straightforward manner, her voice trembled slightly as she bluntly questioned whether he really did not intend on kidnapping her to use as leverage against Aster, and Hermes gently reassured her that he would not. Moreover, he stated that even if he were to kidnap her, he doubted Aster would react strongly or take any significant actions, revealing that his true objective was simply to make Aster acknowledge his mistakes in their own way. He also shared with Sarah that Caddy genuinely felt a sense of unease regarding her safety, as Caddy had once told him about her observations of Sarah's gentle behavior, characterizing her as a kind-hearted, down-to-earth girl who never boasted about her talents. Furthermore, Caddy had also recalled being shocked during their public confrontation, as she noted that Sarah's gentle and timid personality made it understandable that she couldn't stand up for herself against someone like Aster. Upon hearing Hermes relaying Caddy's heartfelt words about her, she was visibly overwhelmed with emotion as she suddenly broke down in tears, admitting that she had expected Caddy to despise her, but was genuinely astonished to find herself on the receiving end of Caddy's concern instead. Noticing her emotional turmoil, Hermes consoled her with gentle words and a soft apology, then suggested they find a suitable location to continue their discussion. As they strolled together through a quiet garden path, a soft smile touched Sarah's lips as she shared with him that Caddy had always treated her with respect and genuine compassion when she was first enrolled in the academy. She revealed that despite being from a relatively insignificant, low-ranking family, she surprisingly possessed 2 rare bloodline magics, making her the target of jealousy and hostility from her fellow peers. However, it was Caddy who had always reached out to her with a warm, genuine smile and a sincere interest back then. Listening to Sarah's glowing praises of Caddy, Hermes couldn't help but feel a familiar pang of bitterness, thinking that those two really seemed to care so much for each other, but the oppressive nature of the twisted politics, with their unreasonable expectations, had regrettably crushed their friendship. His tone shifted and became more firm as he asserted that while he understood her circumstances very well, it was an undeniable fact that she had blindly followed Astor's lead without question and betrayed Kadi by publicly revealing the false information. Yet he remarked that unfortunately, this was a common occurrence in a country where weak individuals like her were often oppressed by those with formidable authority and power. It was considered essential to absolutely follow the opinions of the dominant personalities, as doubting or opposing them was deemed a sin in noble society. With a tinge of regret, he noted that this was the harsh reality of how the nation functioned, a painful truth he had been reminded of since his arrival in the royal capital, and further acknowledged that Kadi was perhaps one of the truly righteous people in that nation, where genuine noble qualities were scarce. Hearing his thoughtful words, Sarah's face radiated a renewed sense of admiration as she vowed to stand strong in her resolve and uphold her own will like Kadi, further asserting that she truly admired Hermes for such words from the bottom of her heart. Moreover, Hermes also promised to effectively convey her deep-seated feelings to Kadi, further offering his thanks with sincere appreciation for trusting him enough to share her story. With a gentle tone, he additionally shared a thoughtful insight that she was underestimating the power of the human heart. He claimed that while it was merely based on his first impression of her, she appeared to be underestimating the worth of her own emotions. He explained that emotions were something significant that could not be ignored for long, and Sarah seemed to be someone who didn't prioritize her own well-being or emotions, and instead believed that they weren't truly hers to claim. Additionally, he emphasized that feelings weren't something which could be forcefully implanted, but instead they belonged to the individual only, noting that if Sarah were to listen to her heart and follow its guidance, things might unfold in a surprisingly positive way. In a calm and gentle manner, Hermes expressed his belief that Sarah would surely become an even more wonderful person if she chose to embrace her true feelings and desires, rather than being directed by others. As his insightful words left her cheeks flushed, Hermes immediately regretted his phrasing, an awkwardness showing in his expression as he hurriedly apologized, explaining that he hadn't meant to make her uncomfortable, and that he wasn't persuading her with any ulterior motives. As he instantly prepared to depart, Sarah halted him in place. She wondered aloud with genuine skepticism what would happen if her heart's true desire clashed with what he and others thought was best for her, but he responded with an unexpected calmness, assuring her that everything would be perfectly fine. He proposed that if such conflicts ever arose, they should simply engage in a fair fight and effectively channel their raw emotions into their magic, as he believed this was the true purpose of their incredible abilities. With their conversation concluded, he bid his farewell and departed, but the gentle resonance of his words remained with her long after he was gone. A few days passed, and within the confined walls of the royal capital, rumors swirled about the Trocchia family's daughter, who had once again emerged victorious from a labyrinth that had proven famously challenging for many noble adventurers. Additionally, excited whispers about her servant's impressive skills circulated among the gossiping crowds, with one remarking that he was Hermes, a former member of the Friendbride family who was once called a prodigy by everyone in the past. They speculated among themselves that though Hermes was born with vast magical power, it was later discovered that he possessed no lineage magic and was shamefully exiled by his family at the age of 10. However, they now proclaimed that Hermes was achieving remarkable feats, believing he probably possessed such immense talent that it simply took a considerable amount of time to awaken. Now they couldn't help but wonder if the rumors about his exceptional abilities were true, asking each other if he was indeed as extraordinary as people claimed. The scene swiftly transitioned to one of the grand mansions, where a messenger delivered a report to Astor about another of Kadi's remarkable achievements, further informing him that her servant's reputation had spread so rapidly that he had become a hot topic among the capital's nobility. Upon hearing that name, a flood of unwelcome memories suddenly rushed to the surface as Astor's thoughts drifted back to his childhood. During his early training, his master had praised him for his extraordinary ability to master powerful magic at the mere age of 5. He had been labeled a genius, and it had been claimed that he would undoubtedly become the greatest magician in the country. At such a young age, people had always praised his formidable lineage magic, and had believed that a genius of his caliber being born into royalty was a fortunate blessing for the entire nation. Astor's entire life had been defined by his status as the greatest since birth, and he had always believed himself to be invincible, convinced that no one could ever surpass him, until Hermes appeared in his life. One ordinary day, as young Astor's carriage journeyed through the countryside, he caught sight of a raging firestorm engulfing a distant part of the forest. As a desperate man pleaded for someone to rescue his trapped daughter, Astor stood motionless and observed the rapidly spreading fire. However, his gaze fell upon a mysterious boy who had positioned himself at the river's edge, casting his magic and chanting his spells continuously without pause. Witnessing Hermes's tireless efforts, Aster contemplated whether he was foolishly trying to lift the river's water to pour out the fire, further deeming it impossible since he believed that a child without lineage magic could never pull off such a feat. To his utter bewilderment, Hermes successfully lifted a massive volume of water from the river with unyielding determination and hurled it towards the burning house, skillfully calming the flame and leaving Aster's eyes wide with a mixture of astonishment and fear. The river's water miraculously flowed like a flock of silver swans, and the onlookers couldn't believe their eyes that such a young child possessed such incredible magic power. Meanwhile, Hermes's father's face beamed with pride as he couldn't stop boasting about his son's accomplishments, marveling at his expert manipulation magic and proclaiming him as his pride and joy. On the other hand, the people Hermes saved gathered around and expressed their deepest appreciation for his invaluable and timely assistance. As night fell, Aster was observed in his chambers, wrapping a blanket tightly around him, his body trembling uncontrollably as he confronted the unsettling truth that he was no match for Hermes's extraordinary abilities. He couldn't believe that a person wielding such a vast and magnificent magic was still around his own age, but he believed with a certainty that Hermes was significantly more powerful and intimidating than him. For the first time in his life, he had considered putting in far more effort, but no amount of training seemed to bring Aster close to Hermes' exceptional level of skill. Though he hated to admit it, Hermes was a more talented magician than he was, and acknowledging this felt like a crushing blow to his ego until a surprising disclosure changed everything. He found out that Hermes possessed no lineage magic. Upon this revelation, he had let out a maniacal laugh as he exclaimed that there was no one stronger than him in the nation after all, and that the one truly receiving the divine blessings was him. Proclaiming that the country had no need for someone as incompetent as Hermes, he had promptly declared Hermes' banishment. That was the extent of their past, and this bitter history had ignited the fire of Aster's jealousy and resentment towards Hermes. Shifting back to the present, Aster remarked with cold malice that Caddy and Hermes continued to be an obstacle in his path despite everything they had suffered, emphasizing that their actions had finally exhausted his patience, and mercy was no longer an option. Meanwhile, at the residence of Trachea, Caddy was unexpectedly approached by Sarah, who gently asked if she could borrow a moment of Caddy's time for a private conversation. As both of them stood against the backdrop of the building, Sarah confessed her eagerness to have a private conversation with her. Although she informed Caddy that she had received formal permission from Aster to meet with her, she was not permitted the freedom to venture out alone without in company. Just then, Caddy's sharp senses allowed her to immediately detect the presence of a strong magical user lurking nearby, and she wondered if that was the mage assigned to watch Sarah. However, a flicker of doubt crossed her mind as she couldn't shake the unnerving feeling that it might be an assassin expertly disguised as a protector. Despite her suspicion of it being a potential trap, Caddy's empathy for Sarah got the better of her, as she couldn't help but feel a tinge of sorrow for the girl, who had clearly come such a long way to meet her. Caddy pushed her concerns aside for the time being, but to her utter surprise, Sarah hastily bowed before her and extended her sincerest apology for her disgraceful behavior at the party and for the false allegations she had made. However, Caddy flashed a kind, genuine smile as she gently encouraged Sarah to lift her head, revealing that Hermes had already shared with her the details of Sarah's deep-seated remorse and sincere affection for her. Yet with a sorrowful expression, Sarah disclosed that there was more to the story, something she hadn't been able to share with Caddy when she first learned about the impending marriage to Aster. With a calming presence, Caddy gently silenced her and asserted that she had long since abandoned her concerns about the meaningless fiancé label, further adding that it was nothing more than a scheme by interfering grown-ups who always imposed unwanted engagements upon them. Moreover, Caddy mentioned that she had always known Sarah was not the type of person who would impulsively pursue anything that sparkled without considering the consequences, further admitting that perhaps no one else in the world possessed such a deep understanding of Sarah's true character as her. Caddy then adopted a more stern demeanor as she questioned Sarah once more whether she truly wished to be Aster's fiancé, clarifying that the question had nothing to do with family or politics, as she sought only to uncover Sarah's genuine emotions. However, before Sarah could even utter a single word, Caddy detected a surge of malicious intent from the person monitoring them. As the hidden observer launched a swift magical attack without any warning, Caddy immediately shifted into a defensive position to intercept it. To her absolute bewilderment, the attack was not aimed at her, but at Sarah as it struck her directly, leaving Caddy's eyes widened in terror, and her body momentarily immobilized in a state of shock as the full weight of the moment crashed down upon her. Sarah tumbled down the nearby stairs with a loud thud, prompting Caddy to dash towards her and drop to her knees to assess the extent of her injuries. But Sarah's body remained limp and unresponsive to Caddy's desperate attempts to rouse her. Carefully evaluating the nature of the spell, Caddy instantly recognized the magical signature of the assailant. It was none other than Chris, though she couldn't comprehend why Sarah had been his main target. The harsh realization crashed down on her a moment later when a crowd of curious bystanders swarmed around them to see the source of the commotion, their hushed whispers filling the air as they took in the disturbing scene. To Caddy's astonishment, a man's voice pierced through the crowd, his arm outstretched as he pointed directly at Caddy, accusing her of casting a malicious spell on Sarah and cruelly pushing her off the ledge. Caddy's voice cut through as she immediately attempted to defend herself, but it was then that she realized with stunning clarity that Chris had been aiming for Sarah all along, arranging this entire sinister trap for the sole purpose of framing her for the crime. Just then, Chris himself arrived at the scene, his lips curled into a sinister smirk as he advised Caddy to cease her ridiculous lies. His voice dripped with mockery as he pointed out that the entire crowd surrounding them were witnesses, implying that her fate was sealed, and he suggested she surrender without any resistance to avoid further consequences. Her voice trembled with rage as she accused him of brutally harming Sarah simply to feed their own egos, and of setting such a vicious trap just to frame her and destroy her reputation. She erupted in a furious outburst, demanding to know if he was prepared to face the consequences for his actions, but Chris retorted with a disdainful scoff that she didn't appear to understand the gravity of her own situation. He further remarked that none of this ordeal would have occurred if she had simply not made her appearance in the capital. Moreover, he spoke of hearing rumors about how she boldly trampled on neighboring nobles' territories and defeated countless monsters along the way, prompting him to question whether she believed being able to use her bloodline magic at will had somehow transformed her into a heroic figure respected by the nation. His expression then darkened to one of pure resentment as he declared that she was unworthy of such a title, insisting that the only true hero in that land was, and always would be, Prince Astor.